Tree House, a novella, written by Jessica Knauss, narrated by Melissa Moran. Copyright 2008-2010 by Jessica Knauss. Production copyright 2015 by Jessica Knauss. 1. The funeral procession Emma had always imagined involved slow pallbearers winding through narrow streets, drizzle, and many women in black cloaks choking back their grief. She had planned in great detail the way Franklin's cedar coffin would slide into the ground, and the way the moist earth would sound as it fell on top. She would carry white lilies, and her grandmother would be there to support her should she faint. Maybe she would carry smelling salts. After that, her plans ended abruptly because what does one do after a funeral, after all? The true funeral had involved only Franklin's mother, the servants, and Emma, without lilies. The day was exceptionally bright. The white clouds seemed cheerful. The pastor had regretfully told about Franklin's profound contributions to humanity. Emma had said nothing at all. She didn't even faint. Of course, the most surprising fact about the funeral was that it had taken place. Even in her darkest fantasies, Emma had never really wished Franklin would die. Afterward, everyone stood in the kitchen expecting Emma to finally realize that the sudden death was real and to burst out with the grief of a bereaved wife. They all wanted to be there to see it. She went to Walt Disney World without having felt bereaved. She spent a lot of time in Epcot Center, collecting desires and later making plans to travel to every continent on the globe. Franklin had never permitted the idea of travel, and now Emma's mind was boggled by the idea that these exotic pictures depicted actual places. These foods were eaten somewhere else on a regular basis. There was a real place where these alien people belonged and where this incredible language was the only way to communicate. She didn't care how inauthentic or touristy it all was. These fantastic symbols represented real places, not fictional ones. Not something inside someone's head that would expire with the flesh. These places were not only real, but eternal. Emma wanted to learn about them all. When she went to the Mexican pavilion, she found nothing that was not to her liking. It all seemed natural. The spicy food, the impassioned people speaking urgently about everything there was to discuss, from ice cream cones to political parties. Which, now that she thought about it, wasn't such a wide range after all. The chef in the Mexican pavilion kept her coming back day after day, not only to try every variety of lunch he could prepare, but even more to hear him talk. When Emma first struck up a conversation with him, he revealed, within minutes, that he had been an officer in the U.S. Navy, and that experience, single and at the same time diverse, seemed to have been integral in every decision and action he had taken since. But what fascinated Emma most was not his egalitarian everyone should work for their own food mentality, but his stories about his travels. He had been from Istanbul to Gibraltar and everywhere in between, around the Horn. Emma needed to look up which horn he meant. And had even had a longshore leave in Bombay. Hong Kong was one of his favorites, but he would never forget Jamaica. Emma wiped her mouth every few minutes as she listened to make sure she wasn't drooling. She couldn't help but feel respect for someone who had seen so much. Which was why, when she heard two boys whispering and giggling, making fun of his accent within earshot, she ran after them as fast as she could. As they escaped, she threw a hot tamale at them. She hoped it left a burn where it hit the kid's back. After 2 weeks, she went home, unable to wait any longer to apply for her passport. She got a new haircut for the picture and put down that she was traveling as a student. Of life, she thought. While she waited the 6 weeks for it to arrive, she noticed coyotes crouching around her with hollowed eyes and slavering mouths. They were hungry for a particular kind of meat, one Emma wasn't willing to share. They wanted her time. A lot of it. The lawyers especially in the first few weeks. As soon as she would hang up the phone from the travel agent, another call would be waiting about the distribution of the resources listed in Franklin's will. In Walt Disney World, she had almost forgotten who Franklin was and that he ever existed. And when Karen, the maidservant, mentioned his name for the first time, it gave Emma pause for a few moments. This lapse made her feel subhuman, because he had been her husband, after all. Even if he was 20 years her senior and so completely absorbed in the running of the estate that he hardly had time to see her, much less to tell her how to run it should anything happen to him. She joined her cat Cordelia in looking out the picture window at the long meadows they called the lawns, and the little copse beyond it and even larger gardens, full of fruit trees and vegetables, long rows of corn, and some decorative flowers. She looked at the roses and irises the gardener had planted at her request when she'd first arrived there. She looked at it all and thought, Franklin did this. But the thought didn't move her at all. What persisted in her mind was a picture of what the estate had looked like before Franklin had bent the land to his will. Shady, brambly, wild. She reached out to stroke Cordelia, but the cat had silently disappeared, as usual. Some of the coyotes would come in person to the house and even disturb her in these moments of reflection. These usually represented another coyote who preferred not to be seen. Lisa, Franklin's daughter. She had run away long before Emma had arrived. Emma had the feeling that Lisa had survived her first nights on the street as a prostitute. That would explain the way Franklin used to tear at the pages when the newspaper would have features on the prostitution problem, and why he would sometimes wipe away a tear when someone like Franklin's mother would thoughtlessly mention Lisa's name. "You needn't worry about Lisa causing us any problems," Franklin had said when making his case for marriage to Emma. "I have decided she is not my daughter anymore." Lisa, however, having survived her first nights on the street and started her own printing business in the city, still felt very much Franklin's daughter. Not enough to attend the funeral, just enough to inherit some money. When her lawyers came to Emma, Emma would look deep into their eyes for some trace of Lisa's presence. She had never met Lisa, but her curiosity was so embarrassing that she didn't even propose a meeting. Besides, Lisa shouldn't feel that Emma wanted to be friendly when she wasn't going to get any of the money. That was the way Franklin had wished it. One must respect the dead. No respect for the living, of course. Here was a lawyer, waiting. "I can't see you now," said Emma. She cast her gaze down, hoping to look grief-stricken. "Why not?" "What gall? Because, frankly, I'd rather not have to deal with this right now. Didn't anyone ever tell you to respect the rights of widows?" The lawyer left, but Emma remained in the doorway, stunned by the word that had escaped her mouth. She was a widow. She had had a husband, and now he was dead. And she was left. At 30, she figured she had maybe 40 more years to go. Why didn't they cremate wives with their dead husbands anymore? She shivered and retreated to her bedroom. Emma swiveled the dial around and around, looking for a radio station that Franklin wouldn't have listened to. It was jazzy, and at first it made her feel it was raining outside. She looked out the window, and the night was clear and black. The stars blinked their secret code, and the moon shone brightly on the lawn. In one of the oak trees, she thought she saw a bundle. It was nestled precariously in one of the largest forks. Fascinated, Emma started toward the back door, but a cloud covered the moon and she could see nothing. She turned the unfamiliar music up louder and tried not to look out. She pulled the sheets off her king-size bed. When the cloud passed, she saw that the bundle had fallen. She put on her house slippers and a sweater and switched on her flashlight. Crossing the huge lawns, she saw that the bundle was white with a large black spot. Getting closer, she could tell it was furry. It was a dead possum. Its eyes were still bright, its fur still silky, its nose still poised for collecting vital information. She almost dropped the flashlight with the horror that took control of her. She sprinted clumsily across the lawn and back into the house, washed her hands and face, and shut the shade. The music on the radio now was related to sunshine and animals and children. It was completely alien. The next day, Emma avoided looking out back and surrendered herself to legal problems. Franklin had promised $60,000 to his charity, but Emma could only spare $30,000 if she was to keep all of the investments that made up her income. And he had given a $500,000 already to that other charity while he was alive, but now he wanted to double that. Where had Franklin come up with these outlandish figures? His property in California he gave to national parks and recreational areas, but his little bit of land in Connecticut he left to his male children. Who were these people? Would they someday congeal from thin air and take their property? Or did they already exist and lurk about, giving some poor woman nightmares and incessant cravings for alcohol? The fact that he had named non-existent persons in the will called into question its legal validity, and by this time, it was well past dinner time and Emma's headache was more than the lawyers could handle. She felt pressured because her passport had arrived in the mail, and she was going to leave for London the next day. She still had to pack and plan an itinerary, and there was the little matter of plane tickets. While waiting for the macaroni to soften, Emma sipped some old cranberry juice, and was sorry when she felt it bite her back in its fetidness. And there was a ring at the doorbell. Emma stared hard at her macaroni, trying to ignore all other stimuli. But Karen, having answered the door, went to Emma and said there was a beggar. A beggar? What do you mean? She's all wrapped up and she wants a place to sleep. I don't know what to tell her. We obviously have the room, but she's so... Curious to see who would be so far away from the city, Emma went to the door with Karen and Cordelia following. Who would try to make a go of begging where no one lived but Emma and Franklin and a bunch of trees? The woman was wearing a black catsuit, and over that a white drape that almost completely covered her. Her hair was literally dirty blonde, on the verge of dreadlocks. She carried on her person some very mysterious and bulky items. Cordelia took one good look at her and sprinted in the opposite direction. "Sorry to bother you," the beggar said in a smoky voice. "My name's Geraldine, and I just wanted to know if I could sleep in one of your trees. It's not a big deal." Emma stood. Karen shifted about nervously. Emma was acutely aware of her own feet, in warm shoes, standing on the shiny hardwood floor, and the woman's feet, covered more thickly with dust than with worn-out sandals. "You must have come this way along the dirt road," Emma said. "Yes," said Geraldine patiently. "It's been refreshing to get out of the city, talk to the squirrels. Not really, of course." "You want to sleep in the backyard?" "In one of those big trees. Is that okay? I won't be a bother. You'll hardly know I'm there." "But we have 10 empty bedrooms," Emma began before she could stop herself. That road was at least 20 miles from the city limit. How would she sleep in the tree? "I would really prefer the tree." "The tree?" "The tree." "Well, then," said Emma. She had already asked this person into her house. She must stop acting so distracted all the time. It would surely get her in trouble. "Certainly you may use my tree. I'm not using it." The woman smiled, turned around, and started down the porch steps to make her way around the house and into the backyard. Karen and Emma looked at each other, astonished. Emma hurried back to the kitchen where her macaroni was boiling over. The night was again clear and starry. Emma pulled her biggest suitcase out of the back of the closet, still hard to maneuver through because it was stuffed with Franklin's shirts and pants. If it hadn't been such an effort, she would have wondered what had happened to the jackets. But instead, she hoisted the case onto the bed and looked out the window. Again, she saw a white bundle nestled in the largest fork of the nearest tree. "My God!" Emma said. What evil toxin was killing all the possums? But it wasn't a possum this time. Now it was Geraldine. Emma left the shade open that night while she slept. Emma was eating eggs and talking on the kitchen telephone with the airline early the next morning, her suitcase half open on the kitchen floor. She couldn't tell whether to take some snacks or a hairdryer or a good book or her electric blanket in case it was cold. So, in the end, she was trying to stuff them all in. When the ticket was all set for the flight leaving in 2 hours, Emma put the phone back on the wall and jumped, startled. The woman wrapped in white was at the back door. "I'm sorry to bother you again," she said. "I wonder if I could have a piece of paper, a pen, an envelope, and a stamp." "Come on in," said Emma recklessly. She climbed over the suitcase on the floor and searched through the kitchen drawers for the things Geraldine wanted. Geraldine hesitated and then stepped into the house. Emma had to retreat into Franklin's study to get the things, and she brought them back out to the kitchen counter for Geraldine to work with. The phone rang again. It was a lawyer. "I really can't talk right now. I'm leaving the country," Emma said, hanging up before he could protest. She scooped the last bit of scrambled egg into her mouth and looked over at Geraldine's papers. "Do you mind if I ask what you're doing?" She wanted to know where Franklin's letterhead was going and to what purpose. "I'm taking out a classified ad in a biker magazine," Geraldine replied. "I'm sending a party to my old boss's house." "What?" "I'm putting his address in under the big party, come one, come all, come as you are section. When they all get there and realize there is no party, well, can you guess?" She finished up her writing, sealed the envelope, and glued the stamp on it. "Thank you. Sorry to be such a bother." "Not at all," said Emma, stepping over Cordelia. There would be no good in getting on this woman's bad side. She saw now. "Would you like some eggs?" "I'll just go down the road and look for a mailbox. Maybe I'll find some berries," said Geraldine. "Thanks anyway." "Well," said Emma, "I'll tell the servants that you're welcome to stay in the tree as long as you want. If it was comfortable, that is." Geraldine creased her brow and folded the envelope. "Are you going somewhere?" "Europe." Emma tried closing the suitcase. "Oh," said Geraldine. "I don't recommend taking any electrical appliances unless you have a voltage converter." She went out the way she had come in. Emma was baffled. A voltage converter. Places were so widely divergent that one needed not only phrase books, but also voltage converters. Exhilarated, she tossed the blanket and the hairdryer out, and the book for good measure, and was then able to close the suitcase. Piran, the gardener and sometimes chauffeur, put the case in the car, and she made her flight with no problem. She was glad someone had been there to tell her the truth. Karen certainly would never have told her, nor would any of those lawyers. Emma realized that she had omitted an important piece of traveler's equipment. Yet another detail no one had bothered to mention to her. The girl next to her on the transatlantic flight was writing enthusiastically that she was glad to be going to England again, and how strange she felt when the airplane lifted off. The girl felt Emma's stare and said, "Is this your first time going abroad?" Emma's face turned red. She had been trying to be discreet about reading over the girl's shoulder, but it was a long flight, and she had brought nothing to keep her mind occupied. "Yes, I'm sorry. Was I bothering you? It's just that you've made me realize I haven't brought anything to write about my travels with. And this being my first time, I think it would be a good idea." "Oh, yes," said the girl. "The best part about traveling is going back over it later, especially with friends. You must have a journal, especially if you're going to England. Here." She reached in her bag under the seat and pulled out a new journal. It had a map of the world printed on the front and back covers. "You're giving this to me?" "I've finished my travels and I didn't use it." The girl was from a small town in Kent, and she made a list of things for Emma to see in London and recommended Dover. Emma's head swirled. Not only were places different, but also people. Then, everyone might not be exactly like the older husband who had always kept her from traveling, and for whom she hadn't yet shed a tear. 2. He taught Shakespeare. Emma had taken the class only because she had already read most of the plays on the list, and she hadn't made it into the curriculum development class she'd really needed. Walking into the class made her nervous. Stepping through the door and seeing Franklin standing in an immaculate pinstripe suit before the class of all-female students, huddled into their chairs as though the apocalypse were imminent, She reached out for something to steady herself. She sat in the front row because that was the only seat left and looked at the syllabus. It was handwritten and had photocopied with streaks through the lines so that she couldn't quite understand the grading procedures or requirements. Then Franklin had written his name on the blackboard. Mr. Andrews, as though he were substituting in a grade school class. And Emma knew suddenly that she would never finish her education degree, because she could never have written her name on the board with that kind of finesse. Franklin's last name was the same as Emma's in pronunciation, but different in spelling. Hers was the old way, Andrews, Andrews, derived from Shakespeare's time, and his was the streamlined standardized spelling. To amuse her, and to seize the opportunity to connect with history, he changed his name to hers when they married, and she left hers the same. This didn't impress her much. In fact, it seemed more than natural because Emma was the one who'd stayed the same all this time, and Franklin was the one who changed. The class was hard. Emma transported the volume of Shakespeare's collected works with her wherever she went, in the hope that the mysteries of Franklin's commentaries would be revealed by osmosis. But she found his style appalling. He interrupted students' questions with peremptory replies and talked half hours after the class was supposed to have been let out about esoteric ideas that no one understood afterward and which would be on the exam, though no one knew it at the time. When his questions to the class were too obscure to achieve any response, he would pull himself to his full towering height and say, "Nothing will come of nothing. Speak again," and release loud guffaws heard throughout the hallway, it seemed. He proceeded to applaud Lear's comment about silence in women, and the students rippled with sighs and inhalings in varying degrees of shock and disgust. His misogyny was no surprise to Emma, however, who had seen him talking with male students from other classes in the hallways and compared it to the way he'd spoken with the students in Shakespeare. She grew to resent the class because she had to take it to make herself full-time. Otherwise, she would lose her academic standing, and with it all those scholarships that made it worthwhile to get out there to Pennsylvania at the beginning of each semester. Much of the volume of the first-day students had disappeared. The only ones who stayed in the class were people stuck like Emma and first-years who weren't acquainted with the registering options. She resented the way Franklin stood and paced and pressed his palms together when he thought he'd made a point. She resented the way he looked at her and then chuckled to himself when she said anything. He would pause right in front of her desk, which she had not been able to change from the first day, because no matter how she tried, she couldn't make it early enough to sit in the back. And he would smile wickedly, and Emma would smell his cologne, which was musky. It stayed in her nostrils for hours afterward. She felt such an overwhelming need to vent her resentment about the class that when her friends saw her coming with that volume of complete works, they would whisper, "Here comes Shakespeare's sister," and try to get away as quickly as possible. She called her mother and said she'd lost her desire to earn a teaching credential, and then her father got on the phone and told her, "You finish what you started or don't come home." Her mother took the receiver back and said meekly, "He doesn't mean that." In the background, Emma heard him say, "Oh, I mean it all right." Emma couldn't blame him. She had transferred out of 2 schools already because she'd been unable to decide what she wanted to do. And in the meantime, she'd gotten older than her peers, and her younger brother had gotten married and was already making breakthroughs at the Chemical Research Center. But when she'd received all those scholarships from that school to the south, she'd felt as though her life was finally taking shape. Driving with her father through the country roads, she saw in front of her the map of her life. "I've always loved children, haven't I?" She'd chattered excitedly. Her father chuckled. "I think while you're gone, I'll finally have the opportunity to throw away all those baby dolls." "Dad!" she said. She swerved to miss a squirrel. She wasn't used to the country, and it seemed intense in a way different from the city. "You do us all a favor when you run those things over," her father commented. "When I was a kid, squirrel pie was the next best thing to fried rabbit." "Dad!" she gasped again. There were no children or squirrels in Shakespeare. Not appreciably, anyway. Franklin wanted a 20-page paper at the end of the term, and he went through the rows, student by student, and assigned topics. Emma was to trace all light and dark imagery in the plays they hadn't read that term, which meant that Emma hadn't read them either.
Include stage directions in your analysis,
Franklin had said, as though it were as easy to her as shifting nervously in her desk and smelling his musk. In her dorm room, while her roommate's radio was turned to the most obnoxious club music possible, Emma's eyes watered, all the clarity running out of them. She crawled under her comforter and thought she would rather die and go to hell, where she would have to listen to club music forever, than continue with this impossible research. She dreamed all night about her failure, in the form of her father's words over a loudspeaker that crackled and was oddly scented. She awoke determined to take her fate into her own hands. She tried to keep in the front of her mind a picture of herself sitting in a circle with children maybe 5 or 6 years old, singing songs and being loved for it even though she couldn't carry a tune. Suddenly, she was in his office, saying tunelessly that he asked too much. Again, she held out her arms to steady herself and brushed against the bookshelf, which ran the circumference of the office and held hundreds of Shakespearean commentaries. Several forests had been harvested to make all those books.
I like you,
he said with no prompt. What?
What would you say if I said you could have an A in the class?
She just stood, swaying slightly, thinking about the D he had given her on the midterm.
If you come out with me to look at the estate I'm going to buy, I will give you an A.
Wait a minute, she said. What kind of harassment is this?
I'm just trying to get to know you better.
She remained on her guard. Anger she hadn't known existed began to surface. You want to know if I'm the kind of girl who'll do anything for a grade? Well, I'm not. I'm not like one of those little freshmen in your classes who giggle when you walk by. I've been around some. His face melted into a gentle smile.
I can see that. That's what makes you different. That's what makes you so like me. And I've been around much longer than you have.
His superiority complex annoyed her like a fly in the office. Maybe you can't tell because you can't see past yourself and your Shakespeare, but I, sir, am 27 years old, and at least twice that emotionally. And still you've managed to annoy me past the reasonable threshold. I am intensely embarrassed right now, and I think I'll be going. By the end of her speech, she was blinded, and as she turned to go out, she slammed herself against that formidable bookcase. Franklin placed his fingers on her shoulder to guide her off the floor, and Emma was surprised that they didn't give her a chill, but a sense of extreme well-being. She ran out the door and down the hallway, but she heard him call,
"Stay after class tomorrow and we'll go!"
Yuck. But which was more repulsive? The thought of going with that man to some unknown destination, an unknown distance away in an unknown vehicle? Or looking through the small print for references to light and dark in plays she hadn't read by a 60-watt desk lamp that nonetheless glared like headlights on unknown vehicles? She left right after class that next day, thereby standing him up. She lived in the library, which by special mandate was the only place students could go without hearing club music. She felt her eyes begin to fail her under the fluorescent light, but she didn't pause to have them examined. She sacrificed her seminar on multiculturalism in the classroom on the altar of William Shakespeare. She forgot about hours of the day and days of the week, and eating and sleeping came to her in desperate fits that saved her life for only a few hours. When she finished her analysis, she held it in her hands and felt the weight of centuries there. She kissed the front page and made the sign of the cross, but she knew it was no use. She could already feel the heat from the place on the page where Franklin would triumphantly mark a red F, his favorite letter. But she had decided to flunk by her own efforts rather than sell herself out. The paper was so thick it wouldn't slide under his door, so she handed it to him in person before taking the final exam, or she would have handed it to him if she hadn't dropped it in her caffeine jitters. His smell nauseated her, and as she wrote in the blue book, she got more and more dizzy. She didn't stop writing until time was called, and this time she firmly placed it directly into Franklin's hand, hoping she hadn't been writing a letter to her mother. "Dear Mother, Please send cookies. It was comparatively easy to gather her whole life from her tiny dorm room while listening to club music and pack it into 2 large bags. She and her roommate went to the bus station together, and then shared a heartfelt and weary hug and implored each other to write before the roommate's destination crackled over the loudspeaker. Emma sat on a stone bench with her bags at her feet. The bus station was crowded with students trying to escape the university after the final exams. Most of them would have preferred to take cabs or airplanes, but way out there, the bus station was the only transportation, barring a private jet. The station was messy with all their discarded trash, with their smoke, their voices, and their backpacks and suitcases. When some of the students cleared to go to another Crackle destination, Emma saw something familiar moving a few feet away. She had to rub her eyes. It was his brown leather briefcase. Wrapped around its handle were Franklin's long fingers, and both the case and the man following behind were weaving through the crowd toward Emma. Her head felt very light, and she didn't know what else to do, so she smiled automatically when he arrived in front of her.
"Emma,"
he breathed.
"I was hoping I would find you here. I'm going to the estate now. Please come with me."
Well, he was persistent. "And do what?" said Emma recklessly. Now that she wasn't his student, she dropped all pretense of respect.
"Look, just look. That's all. I have a dream, Emma, and I just wanted to share it with you."
"But why me?" said Emma. She could hardly hear herself over the noise of the bus station. The loudspeaker crackled her destination. "I have to catch that bus."
"But I've got a car. I can get you right home after. 15 minutes, Emma. Just a second in your lifespan."
He placed his hand lightly on her shoulder, exactly where he had touched her when she'd fallen in his office. And again, she felt an overwhelming sense of well-being. Well, the folks at home could wait 1 second out of their entire lifespans. Emma hoisted her bags on her shoulders and remembered where she'd put her pepper spray. "Where's your car?" Franklin wanted to take one of the bags at least, so Emma let him have the one without the pepper spray. The car was parked close, and he opened the door for Emma and put his briefcase in the front seat next to her. As he placed her bags in the trunk, Emma rifled through the contents of that mysterious, innocent-looking briefcase. On the bottom was a heavy, dry book of Shakespeare criticism. Emma knew it only too well from her Light and Dark project, and her hand jerked away at its touch. There was also a collected sonnets and 10 really sharp pencils. Ouch! Held together by a rubber band. The dust from their erasers was getting all over 3 silk ties in varying shades of red, and a date planner. Emma felt something wet and cold under the ties. It was a pink kitchen sponge. There was a folder full of essays and Blue Book exams, and luckily they were in alphabetical order. Emma looked at her exam, and it said D-. Well, her GPA was shot, but it was better than an F, and she'd done her best. There was also a blank, unsealed business-sized envelope, which Emma opened up. Inside was a check for several $1,000s. Franklin was opening the driver's side door. Emma tried to stuff the check back into the briefcase, but Franklin saw her.
"I don't know if you know it, but this has been my last semester as a teacher,"
he said as he sat down, buckled himself in, and fiddled with the mirrors as though he'd never driven before. "You're retiring?" said Emma, her face red.
"That's what that check is all about,"
he said. He started the engine and pulled straight out. Fortunately, the red pickup behind them had yielded. When the car stopped again, Emma thought it was getting dark already, but it was 3 o'clock and there were trees all around. The shadows were long. They wrapped themselves around the old house, visibly creeping forward as Emma and Franklin stood there before the house's practical squareness.
"It's a real steal,"
said Franklin as he surveyed the crumbling facade and creeping brambles. "No victim would be desperate enough to prosecute," said Emma, backing away as he absently started to put his arm around her waist.
"Prosecute?"
said Franklin.
Oh, I get it. A steal.
He chuckled deeply.
I guess that means you don't like it. We'll be fixing it up, of course, just as soon as the papers are signed. Come in.
There wasn't even a lock on the front door, which opened with an agonized creak. The floor plan was designed in the shape of a square bracket like the ones Emma had seen too many of while reading Shakespeare commentaries. An open bracket if you stood to the south, and a closed one if you stood to the north. From the entry hallway along the straight shot, Franklin guided Emma through a series of dark square rooms with no paint left on the walls, because it was all chipped off onto the floors, saying things like,
Bathroom, obviously. This will be the master bedroom. It's the biggest. The window will have a great view of all 60 acres of the property once we get all this cleared.
Through the window, all Emma could see were leaves, thorns, and brambles, as though the whole house had been submerged in a thicket.
This will be a guest bedroom, and so will this. This, I think, will serve for a study. This room is where I will keep all my Shakespeare. My office at school isn't the least part of everything I've collected through the years. I'm flattering myself by thinking of this room as Folger.
Are you trying to make me sick? You know how you've made me feel about Shakespeare. Somehow, he had wrapped his fingers around her hand and she hadn't noticed, but now she yanked it away. He looked down into her eyes.
I'm sorry. I forgot myself. Would you like to see some of the property?
Before Emma replied, he led her out the back door, which didn't creak only because it had no hinges, and down an overgrown path in the even more intense dark.
I'm going to clear all this out. We'll have vegetable gardens, potatoes, corn, cabbages, onions, strawberries, everything. And then maybe some forest. But here we'll have wide and clear green lawns stretching I don't know how far.
Again, he came down from his dream to squint at her through the dark.
That doesn't excite you.
She shook her head at the brambly ground. No. He started back toward the house and she followed. Otherwise, she would have been lost. They went straight through the house and back out to the car, no longer an unknown vehicle. He fished his keys out of a pocket and gave them to her.
Why don't you drive yourself home?
What about you? Emma imagined him dying of exposure in the dripping wet forest and shivered.
I'll try to get you to like Shakespeare. Will and I go way back, you know.
There was no other way for her to get home, she figured. He showed her the trick to starting the engine and how to maneuver around the almost faulty transmission, and as they sped out of the trees and onto the paved highway, Franklin began to think of reasons someone like Emma couldn't avoid liking Shakespeare.
He deeply understands the human soul, Renaissance and modern. He invented many of the words and phrases we commonly use today without even thinking of him. He understood the drama of everyday life.
Where are you getting this stuff? Emma finally demanded when she became conscious that she had fallen into the rhythm of his didactic voice.
Years, he said. So many years.
Emma swerved to miss an especially bold squirrel.
If you'd hit it, we could have had squirrel pie,
said Franklin. Dad! Exclaimed Emma. 4 hours of driving, mostly in silence, and 20 minutes in a burger joint, deluged in noise, put them at the doorstep of Emma's parents' home at 7:55. Franklin clasped her hand.
But the real reason I love Shakespeare is that I identify with him. He was a dirty old man, and so am I.
Emma resisted the urge to shout, Bingo! She shut the door between herself and Franklin. It was only after she heard him start the engine that she wondered whether he would go all 4 hours back in the dark. It was only after she kissed her mother warmly and hugged her father stiffly and sat down to a cup of tea that she remembered that she'd left her bags in the trunk of Franklin's car. Well, they hadn't been very valuable things anyway. Just her academic life. It was only after she'd gotten into bed and started to feel the stiffness from all that driving set in that she remembered distinctly the arabesques in his voice and his hands, strange and inscrutable, and questioned whether he really was a dirty old man. The next morning, Emma was awake very late, as was her right as a college student on vacation. She sat at the kitchen table, rubbing her eyes in the near afternoon sunlight that spilled in from outside. Her father got up from his chair in the front room and plunked a white envelope in front of her. Her name was on it, and she recognized the handwriting. The subject matter, however, was impenetrable.
My dear Emma, I'm not afraid of my feelings. Embarrassed by them sometimes, but not afraid to let those close to me know about them. I wanted to thank you for coming with me to see the estate. It means a lot to me, and sharing it with you warms my old heart in ways you can't yet understand. I would have loved to repay you with an embrace, but I could tell you wouldn't have wanted that. I've been thinking about the things you said and the way you acted, not only yesterday but throughout the term in my class, and I'm filled with an immense feeling of unworthiness. Emma, if you ever see what I see in you, you will gasp in astonishment. I see you as one of the most worthwhile, worthy, and attractive human beings I know. Believe it! You are riddled with doubt, and I cannot see why. Perhaps what you see as malformations are what make you so incredibly attractive, not only as a friend, but as a woman. At my soul, I am very kind, caring, and loyal, but also capable of more than you could ever imagine. I am honestly humbled that you have been so kind to me, and that I have this opportunity to ask for your friendship. Believe me, I could not live with myself were I to deceive you. I want no deceptions between us, so I write from my heart and ask that you write from yours. Do write. When will I hear from you? Will I ever see you again? With love, Franklin.
Emma looked up at her father blankly.
What is it?
He asked. I don't know, Emma breathed. Where did you get this?
It was stuck in the front door. I found it when I went to get the paper. Is something wrong?
He reached for the page, and Emma jerked it away. Let me read it again, she said. She did, and then she laid it on the table where her father read it over.
What is he talking about?
Her father said gruffly.
Going to estates? Incredibly attractive? Who is this guy?
He was my Shakespeare professor, said Emma. That's all. Emma's mother came to the table from the bedrooms where she'd been folding towels. Your Shakespeare professor sent you a letter? Wow, he must have really liked you. Mother, that's the one I've been complaining about all semester. He hated me. He gave me F's and D's all the time. He ruined my entire semester. So now he sends me a letter. What am I supposed to do? Her mother finished reading the letter. It looks like you should write him back. He's being very above board. She set the letter on the table and patted it like a child. Emma poured herself a bowl of the Fruit Loops her mother had bought especially for her return home, and took it and the letter to the TV. Saturday morning programming was not as much fun as she remembered it. Brainless cartoons and news shows, and then the ever-informative gardening shows and craft exhibitions. What was a 27-year-old college student supposed to watch on Saturday morning? Emma watched her mother putting the folded kitchen towels back into their drawers and felt like a neglected market. Or a non-existent one. Mother? What am I supposed to say to this guy? Her mother stopped by Emma at the TV on her way back to the bedrooms. Tell him thank you for the letter. Tell him how much you didn't expect it. Ask him how and when and why he left it in the front door. Tell him how you appreciate being thought of so kindly. Tell him anytime he wants to write you, he should, if that makes him happy. The question, my dear, is what not to tell him. Live a little. Didn't your college teach you how to live? Can't say that it did, said Emma. She put the letter on the coffee table and lay down on the couch. Her eyes focused on the television, her brain seeping through the cushions and down to the floor. Her mother shouted out from Emma's room, Emma, where are your bags? I left them in the trunk of his car, said Emma. Left them in the trunk of his car? Her mother said vaguely. She came back out to the living room. Well, There's something to write about. Don't you want them anymore? Emma sat up and faced her mother. All that was in there were school things. I've decided school just isn't for me, she said matter-of-factly. Emma, you're dropping out again? What about your dream of preschool teaching? What will your father say? What will you do? I don't know. Do I have to do something specific? Her hands on her hips, Emma's mother said, Don't you feel any kind of pull toward a path in your life? I hate to compare you two, but your brother was always very driven, and look how well things turned out for him. Don't you have any sense of fate? You have to have some idea of what you're going to do. Emma shifted her weight on the couch. I guess I'll write to my Shakespeare professor.
Dear Emma, thank you so much for your words. They went into the treasure box of our special room in my spirit where I know they will be kept forever. Thank you. That was a wonderful gift you gave to me. Even though I cannot see you, I can see the radiance that shimmers all around you and comes out in your words, as if you were sprinkled by Tinker Bell's dust, made to glow from the inside out. It makes my heart soar like an eagle. The way I got that letter onto your door was by writing it in the middle of the night. I slept in the car about 20 feet away from the tree outside your bedroom window. Dear, I'm afraid I'm not a very good hider of my emotions. I'm crazy about you and love spending time with you. You are a wonderful woman, complicated, delicate, strong, compassionate, smart, observant, honest, and it's all wonderfully attractive. We would never run out of things to say to each other or lose interest in each other, should you ever truly become interested in me. It would be a celebration of life. I read your letter and think back to when you were with me at the estate, standing in my living room, in the yard, looking so very beautiful. My insides were doing flip-flops over my otherwise composed outward demeanor. Tore me to pieces. If your letter is any indication, I know you understand what I'm saying. I am so longing for your words, for you. When will I see you? I do hope it will be soon. Yours, Franklin.
Dear Franklin, I suppose you will see me pretty soon. As I said before, I'd like my stuff back. I don't know what you read in my words that made you so happy, but it is easy for me to point out what makes me react. Such lavish compliments? Where are you going with this? My mother says you are being above board. I hope you are. But why the sudden change from the way you were during the semester? Was it all a facade? I was under the impression that you nearly hated me and had no respect for me at all. Now you say I'm wonderful? I don't know what else to say to you. Emma.
Dear Emma, thank you for your honesty. I would have written much more in the last letters, but I was afraid of gushing. Why the facade? I'm far too intense. I know no other speed. It's for my safety's sake and the sake of those around me, Emma. Quite frankly, I frighten myself sometimes. How am I to amplify myself to you? Why the facade? Perhaps it is because I am honestly, at age 47, in utter awe of standing before some of my students, you having been one of them. I have a checkered past, and I have seen both sides of the law. I don't see lines as you well-brought-up people do. I have never had lines to hold me captive except those I have given myself. Emma, do you comprehend what it is like never knowing for certain except through word or deed whether what I say is out of line? I believe in the beauty that all things are possible, and if you haven't gathered it by now, the more far-flung the combinations, the more at home I feel. That isn't comfortable for most. Emma, I love you, knowing full well our circumstances. Some of what this intensity is about, some of what I'm afraid of, has a lot to do with you. What I fear is the exhausting intensity of human connectedness of my I with your I, of our human I's meeting with our human you's. And while it is frightening and exhausting, I crave it, for in those times when we have been together, it has been so intense. I know that I am in the presence of God because of you. It is my joy that you use me, if that be your will. It is my ecstasy that my I is so connected to your you. I want to know the I of your you. How you give this to me in such a lovely way. But what is loveliest is that you are capable of love. Yours with much feeling, Franklin. P.S. Let me know when you can see me, and I'll be there. There is no distance great enough to keep me from you.
Emma felt for an instant like that blue and green globe nightlight used to spin so carelessly, watching Pennsylvania run around in circle after circle, merging with each other, unknown territories. "Is something wrong?" asked her mother. Catching her breath, Emma said, "No one has ever written me such poetry before." She wanted to dance around the room and wave the letter like a flag. "What about that nice Johnson boy in high school? He wrote you a sonnet every week." This gave Emma pause. "Is that why I don't like sonnets?" She waved the letter at her mother, a banner of sentiment for all poets to look up to. "This is a different kind of poetry, Mother. It's good. It means something." The mother reached toward the proud flag. "I must read this." "Oh, no," said Emma, quickly folding the letter along its original lines and sliding it back into its envelope. "This one I can't show you, I'm afraid. It would be a serious violation of the privacy of a man I highly respect." The mother turned around and picked up her paperback from the chair and, sitting down facing Emma, held it open in front of her face. "At this rate, I don't know why you don't become an English major." "Oh, geez, you sound just like my adolescent friends at school." "Speaking of whom," interrupted her mother, "why haven't you called any of them? What do they do over the summer? How about that nice roommate?" "Oh, they're all busy, I'm sure. They don't seem much like letter writers." Emma glided back to her room, and, thinking about the embrace Franklin had written he'd wanted to give her, she wrote him a letter telling him that June 15th she would wait for him at her house. Perhaps they could go down to the high school track together or something. Her daily exercise began to include long rocking sessions in the chair looking out the front window. At first, she told herself she was looking at the sunny day on the roadside as though it were a picture, that she was memorizing details for a possible career as a graphic artist. To convince her mother, sometimes she would rock and look with a drawing pad in her lap. Sometimes she even sketched, but it never turned out to look like the roadside she studied so carefully. She especially couldn't bring herself to draw that plain, rusty mailbox on the side of the street. Such an act might curse it, and it needed all the luck it could get. She often had to stop rocking in order to calm her insides. She told her mother she thought she might have the flu, but such a flu never lasted so long, remaining so mild. Mild! If this was mild, this, whatever it was, this repulsion-attraction experiment, then surely she never wanted to fall in love. This was as bad as the flu. Love must surely be death. If this unexplained minor condition made her insides fly apart and swarm inside her whenever she saw the mail truck, then love must make the outsides come apart too. And that must be why she'd never seen a person truly in love before. They must have all died, exploded, and their funerals must have been closed casket. The response letter she'd been expecting never came, or if it did, it was seized, confiscated, censored before Emma ever saw it. June 15th, however, was as inevitable as eyelashes. Emma had been blinking uncontrollably for half an hour when her heart seized up, and her legs were incapacitated by Franklin's car pulling up under the tree in front of the house. "Well, he's out there. Aren't you going to get the door?" said her mother. Without the use of her knees, the path to the door became steep and brambled. But both Franklin and her mother were patient enough to wait. It was the rule. Emma must get the door. Franklin was dressed all in brown and beige, and he reached for Emma's hand. And by the time he'd shaken it, her nerves were completely calmed. "Hi," she said.
"Good morning," he said. "Is this your mother?"
"She is," said Emma steadily. "Good morning, Mr. Andrews," her mother said brightly as she bounced up and down behind Emma, trying to get a better look. "Such a coincidence that we have almost the same name."
"Did you know that Lancelot Andrews, possibly your ancestor, worked in the First Westminster Company, translating Genesis through 2 Kings for the authorized version?"
Franklin volunteered. "Well, my goodness, we learn something new all the time," said the mother. "Emma's told me so much about you."
"It must be all good, since Emma doesn't know enough about me to tell you anything truly awful,"
Franklin replied with the same brightness. "Well, you've got me there," said her mother. "Yes, okay," said Emma to Franklin. "Well, you don't want to hang around here, do you?"
"It does seem to be a lovely house, but—"
"Well, I guess we'll be going then, Mother," Emma said. Franklin started toward his car and Emma stepped out the door, but her mother grabbed her by the arm. "How old is he supposed to be?" she hissed. 47! Goodbye!" Emma loosed herself and went for the car. After he had opened the door for her and had finished the same mirror-adjusting rituals as before, starting the car and pulling sharply out, Emma couldn't help asking, "How old are you again?" Franklin cleared his throat before answering quietly,
47.
"Are you sure?" asked Emma, shaking her head, observing the deep gorges running down his face from his eyes and the completely colorless hair. "I mean, I don't want to be rude."
"I know,"
said Franklin.
"I don't look very good. I haven't taken care of myself. I've had a wild life. Nothing you could ever imagine."
"I've got a pretty good imagination," insisted Emma. Franklin squinted at the road.
"Let's just say I haven't always taught Shakespeare."
Emma helped him watch the road. "So, where are we going? Do you want to go to the pool?"
"I was hoping you would agree to come back to the estate with me. The workers have made some real progress. You may not recognize it. And, Emma, I always want you to recognize it. I feel you know what it's all about. I want to share it with you."
Emma was embarrassed to ask, especially without that poetic energy she sensed rising through him, but she just couldn't compete with her curiosity. "So, what is the estate all about?"
"You will come to see it, won't you?"
"Sure, but let me know what it's all about." Emma folded her hands across her seatbelt.
"I was sure you knew exactly what was going on. I felt like you understood me as fully as anyone your age can understand someone like me, who's been through so much more than you ever will be. Why don't you just come back to the estate? Then you'll see it, and I know you'll understand."
"Okay." She noticed that his hands shook a little and that his eyes watered incessantly. She watched the road, alert, and suddenly she remembered that it was almost time to renew her license, which meant that she was very old. Soon her own hands would shake and ache, and her eyes would fall out in a flood of mediocre tears. She shifted in her seat absently.
"You act uncomfortable,"
said Franklin. "I'm fine. Don't worry about me," said Emma. She looked out the window every time Franklin slid his glance toward her.
"You don't talk much,"
said Franklin.
"I always thought you were such a great talker. You always spoke up in class."
"I did?" She remembered saying 3 sentences the entire semester, and only because she had been so thoroughly disgusted with the goings-on. Someone had to defend Gertrude, didn't they? Even if there was nothing to defend. "I never say much. I don't have that poetic touch some talkers have."
"Oh, Emma, your voice is music. Any word falling from your lips must be poetry, since poetry is the only type of lyric that can be set to such music."
Emma felt faint.
"Now I've embarrassed you. What a dolt. Please, I beg your pardon."
"Oh, I'm not embarrassed, just uncomprehending."
"Oh, Emma, if ever you see in yourself what I see in you, you will flip your own wig."
He chuckled, and they stopped in front of a house. the first Emma had seen along the road for several miles of greenery. Franklin carefully removed the keys from the ignition, looked into Emma's eyes for an instant, and got out of the car. He stretched his legs, making a loud cracking sound, and then he walked around to Emma's side. He opened the door for her.
"Here we are,"
he said. Emma slid out, legs first, and stood stupefied before the house. You're right. I didn't recognize it. All the trees that had created so much shadow the last time were gone. And at midday, the house seemed diminished, more innocent. A man was applying a fresh coat of gray paint to the outside, so that the sun gave the entire facade an aspect of silvery light. As he descended and climbed the ladder to move it along the house, it wavered sickeningly, and Emma wondered whether such peril was worth it, just to paint the house gray all over again. They went through the new door, which didn't creak, and which Emma admired as being solid oak, with delicate cutouts and gingerbread all around the windows. Wow, Emma said. The gloom of the previous time had been banished by electric overhead lights. They gave a warm glow consistently and silently, benevolently watchful, guardian angels of light, the ones who didn't fall with Lucifer. Franklin guided her along the same route as before, but Emma had to force herself to believe it was the same house. She saw the rooms, dilapidated before, completely recovered now, some with people painting cheerful colors, and some people moving furniture. When Franklin would appear in the doorways, they would ask him how it looked or whether he wanted anything changed. Franklin would turn to Emma and say,
"I don't know. What do you think, Emma?"
They arrived at the Shakespeare Library, and Franklin had to wipe tears of pride from his eyes as he described what had yet to be done. The walls were covered with the beginnings of bookshelves reaching the ceiling. In the center of the room, there was a chair, table, and lamp, covered with white sheets. The window was covered by a red velvet curtain with gold tassel fringe.
"These skeleton bookshelves are going to be covered with grains we're importing from England right now, from Shakespeare's time. Some of them have Renaissance carvings on them. I've always dreamed of something like this. I'm not at all sure they'll hold all my books, but these measurements were all aged wood we could get. What do you think?"
Well, it is better than before, started Emma. Of course, I don't know.
Is there something you don't like about it?
He wrung his fingers painfully. Well, don't get upset, she said. But are you planning on having any other books than Shakespeare-related ones? It seems sort of unbalanced to have only Shakespeare. Won't you ever feel like reading anything else? He chuckled.
Reading, Emma, is not the point. But I think I see what you mean.
They left the room and went next door.
How about this room? We could make it into a regular library, with all kinds of books. What do you think?
Very good, she said. He took her hand and led her outside through the back door, which didn't creak either. It was outfitted with gaudy brass hinges, minutely oiled so as not to release the smallest sound. Emma was overwhelmed by the vast expanse of empty space where before had been brushes, brambles, and trees so high she couldn't see their tops in the dark. Pointing south, Franklin was saying,
Over there, they're getting ready to build the stables. I hope to have several champion thoroughbreds living there by the time the entire estate is finished. Tomorrow or the next day, they'll start planting the vegetable garden right over there. You have no idea how hard it was to clear all those trees out. As you can see, they still haven't finished.
Emma was looking far out at the few trees left beyond the great emptiness, catatonic.
What's wrong, my dear?
Asked Franklin. I think you should leave those trees where they are. Suddenly I feel a great affinity for those trees.
Oh!
Franklin laid his fingers on her shoulders and looked in her eyes.
Of course, then. They won't take a single other tree. We may even plant some new ones so there will be a nice straight line where the lawns meet the forest.
So much orderliness sort of defeated what Emma had been thinking, and she felt her heart sink. But suddenly, Franklin put his lips up against her forehead, and then he kissed her lips, groping with his tongue. She had never been kissed like that before. Her heart stopped sinking, and she felt it distinctly below her stomach, spinning around like that old globe. When he released her, Emma took a few steps back and looked around for her lost balance.
"Oh, Emma,"
Franklin exclaimed. "Maybe it's time you took me home," Emma said, after shaking her head, feeling entire semesters of college work fly out her ears.
"Oh, certainly. Yes, right away,"
said Franklin. But they stood there, and Emma looked at him, and she leaned toward him by some strange twist of gravity, and he kissed her again. This was not love. It was dementia caused by influenza. "Let's go now, please," Emma whispered. They didn't speak on the way back, and Emma turned the radio to some impartial Mozart. She didn't want to look at him as she got out of the car at her home, but he detained her by the arm, much the way her mother had earlier in the day, and said, looking at her with those wet eyes,
"Farewell. Oh, Emma, but that the busy day, waked by the lark, hath roused the ribald crows, and dreaming night will hide our joys no longer. I would not from thee. I do beseech you. Pardon me. I am ashamed. Oh, heavens, what have I done? For this time I will take my leave, my lady."
He released her. He drove away. Emma felt a strong desire to sit outside under the tree and just think. Instead, she went inside, where she couldn't see anything against the bright afternoon. "You smell like he did," her mother cried. "Well, he hugged me," said Emma. "What could be more innocent?" Many things, many things." 2 days later, Emma was listening to Franklin's low voice crawl through the telephone wires.
"Thank you for coming to the phone,"
he said.
"Should I apologize for what I did? I certainly would never want to hurt you, not after you've blessed me with true happiness. True happiness, Emma, is a rare thing. It happens only when two souls look on each other in complete nakedness. For therein lies all beauty. I'm sorry."
"I don't know," said Emma.
"You're confused," said Franklin. "That's natural at your age. But you saw the estate, and I think you understand what it's all about. Don't you?"
"I don't know." Emma looked out the window and saw the mail truck again.
"Would it be better? Would you not be so confused if I were to offer you a physical home to complement the spiritual home you've already made for yourself in my heart?"
"What?"
"Oh, Emma, as I've written to you in the past, I'm not embarrassed by my emotions, but I am afraid of what they might do to you. I love you, Emma, and right now, I'm asking you to marry me."
There was a long sigh on the other end of the phone. "Oh," said Emma.
"I know what am I? 20 years older than you? But that's a pedestrian comparison. I just have more life to share with you. But does marriage make some things better? Do you understand where I'm coming from now?"
Emma surveyed the plush carpet and the matching chairs and couch and the television set and the hunting magazines piled on the floor. She thought she could hear her mother folding towels, or maybe making Emma's bed. The mail truck drove away from the set of boxes that connected Emma's street with the rest of civilization, without leaving anything in Emma's box. Maybe all loves were not the same. Perhaps some loves were survivable. Maybe flu symptoms were enough. "Yes," she said.
"Yes, you understand. Of course you do. We speak with our souls when we're together."
"Yes, I will marry you." That was when the trumpet sounded and the dead were raised, or so it seemed from all the noise and brouhaha the announcement provoked. Nothing was as loud as her mother's squeals of delight as she hugged her newly engaged daughter, pressing all the air out of both sets of lungs, starting a bagpipe-like drone as she exulted and started to make plans all in the same instant. A professional took a picture of Emma and Franklin together, and Emma's mother chose one that showed them side by side. Franklin's long fingers curling around Emma's shoulder as they had before, to put in the newspaper with the engagement announcement, which wasn't printed until after the wedding. It happened so quickly. Emma was at the estate, still pretending to be on honeymoon, when she received the clipping from her mother in the mail. They never took a vacation honeymoon, although Emma had notions of Niagara Falls or Cancun or Hawaii. Franklin was sure that hiding away together on his masterpiece estate, now almost complete, with no one else to bother them and no work to do, would be more than the ideal honeymoon for any couple. Emma spent a lot of time sitting in the sunroom with her eyes closed, feeling the warm rays of sunlight burn her face because there were no longer any trees to protect her skin. Here she thought long and hard about it and decided that no matter how many rooms the house had, she didn't like the idea of sleeping 2 rooms away from her husband each night, as they had been doing. She entered his study and knocked on the doorframe, and he looked up at her, taking off one pair of glasses and substituting another.
"Emma, what brings you here?"
he asked.
"Sit down. I have something to tell you, too."
Cordelia was snuggled comfortably into the couch, and Emma was grateful for her presence. They had chosen her out of a box of long-rejected kittens at the supermarket when they had gone together the second day of their marriage. Emma sat on the couch across from Franklin's desk, while Cordelia variously stuck her claws into Emma's lap and paced back to Franklin's chair leg. Emma listened to him teach a class on the idea that he thought their time of total seclusion and sloth was over, and the first work they would have to do was hire some housekeepers and a gardener.
"How would you like to do that?" he offered. "You would probably see them more than I would anyway. Because, and I'm sorry to tell you this, it really looks like I'm going to be out of town a lot for a while. I'm sorry."
"Okay," said Emma. "Sounds reasonable." Franklin looked at her with the sweetness of a chocolate chip and then turned back to his work, switching glasses. "Why don't you get bifocals?" asked Emma. Turning vaguely back in her direction, he said,
"I'm too old to get used to that kind of thing."
He turned back again. 47 isn't so old."
47.
Franklin breathed into the roll top of his desk.
"I sometimes forget I'm that young."
Emma waited a few moments and said, "So?"
"La?"
replied Franklin absently. "I was wondering," Emma began as she looked him over. His hunched form, his wispy hair, his hanging wrinkles, his yellow teeth, his drippy eyes. She continued more from an imprecise sense of principle than from any distinct desire. "I think I'd rather sleep in the same room as you than apart." Franklin dropped his pencil and sat on his fingers.
"Oh, Emma, you do me too much honor," he exclaimed.
"We did get married, didn't we?" she said, suddenly wondering if all that whirlwind had truly been a dream.
"Of course, you're right, my beautiful Emma."
He opened the middle drawer in the desk.
"I've got the papers right here to prove it."
He rose toward Emma and ran his fingers twitchingly through her hair.
"You move your things right into the master bedroom. It will be a delight to live so intimately with you."
He wrung his hands. He was soon off on business in California. When he called, Emma thought he didn't sound any farther away than he had at the estate.
"I miss you,"
he said.
"I feel your absence stitched through me with a leather needle. How I need you to shine with that radiance of yours. I doubt I'll ever be able to leave you again once I've got you back."
This was not of the same inspiration Emma had become accustomed to before they married, and every time he came back, the need to leave was always stronger than the need to stay. She hired 2 women to do the housekeeping, a mother and daughter, the daughter being 45 years old and the mother not caring to admit at any concrete age. She also hired Piran to be the gardener, and he quickly became Emma's chauffeur when she didn't get to the DMV soon enough to renew her driver's license. Franklin suggested it would be so much easier that way, and reminded her that she didn't go anywhere much anyway. All this help gave Emma less to do. She considered reversing her earlier, desperate decision and continue with that faraway dream of a teaching certificate. When she started receiving course catalogs and registration information for the next term, however, they were always inexplicably missing by the next day. The school things she had left in Franklin's trunk at the beginning of the summer had never turned up either. She started looking in the want ads to see if she was qualified for anything. And when she finally started to be able to use the pen she always kept near the kitchen telephone to circle some of the ads, the newspaper started to come more erratically. Sometimes it would turn up in the hedges in the backyard, and sometimes it was a mile down the road in a ditch. Emma called the paper and switched deliverers, but this one seemed even worse, because, forthwith, the paper stopped arriving at all. Estimating that she might be able to dig up enough acquaintances, she asked whether Franklin would mind, now that it was completely finished, if she threw a sort of estate warming party, something like they used to do in those novels, with everyone staying for a few days or a month or two, and ballroom dancing and Renaissance theater and tea every day and grand feasts. He didn't know which novel she was talking about. He thought the estate was warm enough the way it was. He was right. It was getting to be the middle of August. Most of the flowers she had suggested be planted in the garden had died in the heat. Emma thought about poetry. She lay awake next to Franklin at night while most of the time he kept a chivalrous distance from her. Sometimes he would smoothly tell her that she was beautiful, but without that poetic effort that used to impress her. Once she had provoked him to touch her. She was sorry. The feel of his fingers had lost all its comfort and sense of well-being and inspired in her a hazy dread that gave her a headache. Sometimes she felt such a strong need for well-crafted words to glide into her ear that she would slide out from under the covers and tiptoe across the hallway into the Shakespeare library. In the light of the dim lamp, she would seek out her favorite volume of complete works, right next to the odd gargoyle carved into the shelf several hundred years ago. The book itself was 73 years old, and its red leather crumbled and left dust-like stains whenever she opened the cover. She had ruined several pages of sonnets with the oil from her hands, and ignorant handling that led to the disintegration of the old paper. All the same, this was her favorite, and she came back to it again and again. She read the sonnets to herself in a whisper so soft, sometimes the sound deteriorated before it reached her ears. Finally, she felt ready to take on something more ambitious. Venus and Adonis. She was so proud of herself that as she whispered the lines, her heart pounded in her ears, and she didn't hear Franklin rise and come looking for her.
"What are you doing?"
he asked, switching on the overhead light as she cowered near the reading lamp. She blushed and paled both at once, her hands clutching the book tightly.
"What are you doing with my book?"
"I'm just reading."
"My book? Why do you have to read that book? It's very rare. You're destroying the spine."
He yanked the book from her and inspected the pages with a sigh.
"Venus and Adonis, huh? Let me hear you."
He selected a less rare volume from the same shelf where Emma had found her favorite and opened it for her to the first page of the poem, holding the rare book with the crumbling red leather cover tenderly in his arms. Emma hesitated.
"Go ahead,"
said Franklin.
"Just like you were before I came."
Emma began with her whisper, but as the natural rhythm started to fall into place, she felt her voice ease into a reasonable volume.
"Stop!" Franklin cried. "You're ruining it!"
Emma's rhythm trailed off and she closed the book, unwilling to ruin it any longer.
"You change the whole meaning when you read it like that."
He switched off the lamp and replaced the books on the shelf.
"Come now, my dear. Back to bed."
He took her hand, gingerly ushered her out of the room, and turned off the overhead light as they left. He bought her membership in the Book of the Month Club, started her subscription to the series of great books, all prose, and created an efficient cataloging system for the new shelves in the non-Shakespeare library. One particularly dark night, Franklin was unstill beside her, turning over and over and making ancient sounds from the bowels of the earth. And Emma felt in her heart that the wedding a year before had truly been a dream. It had been far too bright. What had taken her so long to realize that the real world is infinitely dark? She slid out of the bed. This time, she tiptoed farther across the long hallway and entered Franklin's study. The middle drawer of the desk rolled out with a creak, and though Emma could tell their wedding certificate was still on the top, as it had always been before, It was now covered with drawer dust. She brushed it off to see the calligraphy letters underneath, and as she did, they flaked and smeared so that the place and the date ran together. She noticed that the paper wanted to crumble. It wanted so badly to crumble, but Emma didn't let it. She put it back in the drawer, right on top. The mother housekeeper was cleaning the Shakespeare library like she usually did on Tuesdays. Franklin was only stopping in for a book before retreating to his study, but he stood and watched her as she delicately used the feather duster on the books, standing on the ladder. When she took a can of chemicals out of her apron pocket to wipe down the shelves, Franklin shouted so loudly she nearly fell.
"Laura, you cannot use that stuff on my Shakespeare shelves. Those have been carefully restored to look practically new from the original. God's teeth, what are you trying to do? Kill me? For in destroying those shelves, you destroy me."
Emma came running at the shouting. The housekeeper climbed off the ladder and stood before Franklin, looking ready to spit.
"Get out of my library, Laura, and never come back."
She left without saying anything. Emma looked at Franklin and said, "That was Karen." Franklin sighed.
"Karen, Laura, Rosencrantz, Gilderstein, they're interchangeable."
Emma went to apologize, but she heard the doorbell and Franklin had buried himself among his dusty, restored shelves. Even with all this, servants and a country estate, she still had to answer her own door. "Hi," the young woman said, flipping her hair. She couldn't seem to decide whether she wanted it to the left side or to the right. "Hello," said Emma. It had been so long since someone had come to the door, way out there, that she had forgotten the recommended procedure. "I've just been riding along here on my motorcycle, and all of a sudden, kapow! It's kaput. So I was wondering if maybe you had some tools or if I could call a tow truck or something?" "Sure," Emma said, backing into the entryway. The young woman stepped inside and looked around as quickly as her furtiveness would allow. Then she took Emma by the shoulders and said firmly, "You're Professor Andrews' new wife, aren't you? I saw your picture in the paper." "Yes," said Emma, shaken. "I have to say to you, then, 'tis not a year or two shows us a man. They are all but stomachs, and we are all but food. They eat us hungrily, and when they are full, they belch us." She released Emma just as suddenly as she had taken hold of her, and Franklin lurched out of the Shakespeare library.
"Othello, Act 3, Scene 4.
The young woman laughed out loud. "What lines?" Franklin's gray face faded even further to white.
"Viola," he gasped. "Excellent wretch."
"Also Othello, 3-3, line 98, said Viola.
"Viola, I've given up that life. Take your dirty games to some cesspool."
"My dirty games? False face must hide what false heart doth know." The two were mere centimeters away from each other now, each more insistent on standing his or her ground than the other. And Emma watched, her eyes wide, as Franklin towered threateningly a full foot above Viola, while she kept her eyes fixed on his, craning her neck. "Though this be madness, Emma, yet there is method in it," Viola said steadily.
"You're trying to turn my wife against me the same way you turned against me. Well, it won't work."
Without warning, Franklin slapped his fingers full force across Viola's face. "I have not deserved this," she cried. She lost her balance for a second. As she regained it, Franklin said,
"Get out of here."
He pushed her out the open door into the sunlight.
"And stop sending me those letters."
Viola looked back at Emma and said, "Emma, examine this man you live with. Ask him what he does with that pink kitchen sponge." Franklin slammed the door and bolted it and watched with Emma through the window as Viola climbed shakily back onto her motorcycle and rode it away. He pressed his fingers against his face.
"Affliction is enamored of my parts, and I am wedded to calamity."
Emma was left to wonder whether she was to take that as a personal insult. Cordelia rubbed up against her legs and mewed. Emma lifted her and carried her into the sunroom, where they enjoyed the afternoon temperatures together. "3. Snow was falling on the estate, which was unusual for the season. Emma hadn't seen it snow there before, and the effect was startling. The whole place blended into the roadside as in a mountain range of lulling ice crystals fallen from the sky. No one had swept the driveway, so the taxi let her off on the snowbank she thought might be within reasonable walking distance to the door, which no one had swept off either. She laid her large 3 bags inside the front door. Inside, there were equivalent mountain ranges of dust in the kitchen and Emma's bedroom, though the rest of the room she looked at seemed reasonably well used. It was about midnight, and Emma had last eaten an airplane bag of pretzels with a cup of water at least 5 hours earlier. She searched through the pantry and found a few potatoes in the bottom of the box. She microwaved them on high. She had seen 17 European countries in 20 days, after dragging that huge bag all over the oohs and ahs of London. But though she had frantically written it all down in her journal, something was missing. She had left her huge suitcase on the train to Paris and hoped it was having fun riding back and forth. In a hotel in Barcelona, suddenly the Mexican cook at Disney World returned to her memory, as though she had lost him behind the couch and found him while searching for something else. She took a direct flight to Mexico City the next day. From there, she had toured Mexico for another 20 days and had bought so many souvenirs that her small bag multiplied into 3, all much larger than the one she had left in Paris. The potatoes tasted surprisingly good. They glided through Emma's mouth and throat like migratory birds going home. She had not touched potatoes in 2 months because she'd been so tired of them. Franklin had been an inexhaustible meat and potatoes man. "Oh," Emma admitted. It was the first time she had thought of Franklin since she'd left. Now that she tasted the potatoes again, she knew that the variety she had sampled on her travels had been boring her, and she began not only to cry, but to burst forth tears of sorrow and anger, potatoes spewing everywhere. When she tried to regain control of her body, she hit her head on the table. The tears quickly morphed into expressions of physical pain. Emma sat on the floor, vaguely expecting Cordelia to visit during one of her nocturnal promenades. There, she slept until morning. "Are you all right?" Laura was saying. Emma opened her eyes with heroic effort through her swollen lids, and there were Laura, Karen, and Piran standing over her. "Just jet-lagged," she said. "I could use a nap." Piran grasped her by the arm and helped her pull herself off the floor. Emma looked at her plate of potatoes and remembered coming back the night before to a deserted house. "How come it's so dusty around here?" The 4 looked at each other with varying degrees of guilt and curiosity. Finally, Laura said, "We've only been coming in about once a week to check on things, and we haven't bothered to clean, since no one was here to get it really dirty." "But I hoped while I was gone you were tending to things just like usual." Silence. "It's that woman in the tree. She's been doing some strange things. We didn't want to tell her to leave after you said she could stay. But we didn't want to hang out with her either," said Laura. Emma blinked. "You mean she's still out there?" She went to the window and looked through the crystalline air at the tree. There was Geraldine, still asleep, straddling the fork and keeping perfect balance. My God, how does she do that? Emma wanted to go out and take a closer look, but when she opened the back door, a blast of cold air stopped her. "It's freezing! Why didn't you make her come inside?" "Like I said, she's been doing some strange things," Laura said. "Like what? She wouldn't hurt anyone," said Emma, with complete conviction as she shut the door. Laura hesitated, but Karen stepped in. "Do you know that she killed the cat, aimed for the stable boy, and slept with her boss?" Emma moved back to the window and took it all in. She slept with her boss, huh? She brags about this? "Oh, you should hear the story she tells," said Piran. "Before the snow came,
I would be out back tending the gardens, and she would walk right up to me and start gabbing.
Emma didn't believe it. She also didn't believe Cordelia was gone. She looked down to check for cat hair on her pant legs. Then Geraldine fell out of the tree. She plummeted like a dead weight. Emma screamed, but then she was even more amazed to see that Geraldine landed on her feet. "My God!" Emma reiterated. "How does she do that?" "She does that every morning," said Karen. "Every morning," said Laura. Suddenly, Emma felt pressure pushing her down, and her stomach was so empty she couldn't counter the weight. "Laura, could you please fix me some breakfast? I'm about to faint." Laura went toward the kitchen, but Karen stood her ground. "What about the woman in the tree?" "I'm going to invite her inside. Please, dust all the rooms you've been leaving. It's giving me a headache." "But who knows what she could do to us when she's in here?" Emma needed a second opinion. "Do you think she's dangerous, Piran?" Piran shrugged his shoulders and turned toward the garage. Emma stuck her head out the door and called to Geraldine. Reaching down to pet Cordelia, who wasn't there, Emma ate eggs and bacon and 3 slices of toast with a cup of tea she refilled 7 times. This was no continental breakfast, surely. But Geraldine humbly took 2 slices of bread and a cup of tea, which she sipped slowly. Emma studied her face, and it looked sunken and gray compared to the way she remembered it. "Haven't you been eating?" Emma asked. Geraldine put down her toast gently. "The frost came and killed the berry bushes along the road." Emma considered. "I would ask why you didn't just ask my people for food, but they've been acting so strange I don't wonder why you hesitated." "Strange?" said Geraldine in 3 different tones at once. Emma sipped the last of her tea and got up for more hot water. "They've been saying you killed the cat." Geraldine stood up. "I'm so sorry. It was a complete accident. I won't ever do anything to endanger any other pets you have now or in the future." She made for the back door. Luckily, Emma had finished pouring the hot water when Geraldine had said that. Her face nearly fell off her shoulders. "Cordelia's really gone?" "I'm so sorry." Geraldine opened the door, but Emma said, "Wait! What happened? Why did you kill her?" Geraldine closed the door slowly, and Emma shivered a little in the breeze. "I was hungry, as I said." "You ate Cordelia?" No. I had set some traps out in the forest for the rabbits. I was going to roast them like in the westerns." She wrung her hands. "I gave her a proper burial, but they're your woods and your rabbits, and I won't ever set any more traps. And if they said anything about the stable boy, it's true too." "You were going to eat Albert?" No. I was chasing a pheasant around the stables. It was right in my range. I aimed, I was going to get it, and then Albert stepped out the door and the handle hit him in the leg. He cried like nothing I've ever seen. I never wanted to scare him like that. I'm so sorry. I should go now and stop messing up your life." Emma put a new tea bag in her cup and stirred it until the string was wrapped firmly around the spoon. "Sit back down here," she said. "You are going to eat. This is ridiculous." Geraldine obediently slid back into her seat and gingerly picked up her toast. "So, you have a shotgun or something?" Emma asked. Guns made her nervous. "No. Why do you ask?" "What were you aiming at the pheasant with?" Geraldine drew a blade from under the folds of her wrap more quickly than Emma's eyes could follow. "With this," she said. Emma knocked her tea over in surprise. "You throw knives?" "I'm sorry," Geraldine said about the tea. "Yes, I do. I'm not sure I would be alive today unless my mother had taught me how to throw this knife before she went to jail." Emma was wiping up the mess and getting another cup and filling it with hot water. "You get more mysterious the more you tell me." "I'm sorry. Can I help?" Geraldine said about the tea. "Just talk," said Emma. This was all more fascinating than the fire-breathing mendicant she'd seen in Mexico. While Geraldine was distracted by her own story, Emma went around the kitchen making various dishes and set them before Geraldine. who ate them without thinking. Through the course of the meal, she had 6 eggs, 15 pieces of bacon, and 4 cups of tea. Emma watched through her eyelids, heavy with travel but propped open by the implied exclamation points in Geraldine's story. Satisfied. "The knife has saved my life more than once," she said, laying it on the table. "When I first lost my job, I was hitchhiking everywhere, looking for a nice place like this one. Once, I was desperate and I got in a car with this weird guy I would never have trusted under normal circumstances. He was going to take me all the way across the state, and then it got dark. So he pulls up to this motel and gets one room, a single. I asked him whether I should get my own room or something, and he said no. I really wanted a shower, so I sort of ignored the one bed and took one. But I had that knife tight in my hands the whole time." Emma wondered whether that had been the last time Geraldine had showered. "So I come out and I'm dripping everywhere and this guy blocks my clothes and won't let me at them. He reached toward me, but I pulled my knife from under my towels and I said, 'You get in that bed, bastard, and you sleep there, and that's all you're going to do.' Pardon my language, but I really said a lot worse at the time. I grabbed my clothes and got out of there as fast as I could, not without throwing my other knife at him. I used to have 2, and he made me waste one." Emma was wondering how Geraldine kept all those things stashed in her wraps, and suddenly she asked, "You didn't kill him, did you?" "No, I wasn't that hungry." Geraldine laughed. She sipped her tea. "This is wonderful. So civilized, it tastes like orange peels." "It's my favorite," agreed Emma. "But there's something else I have to ask you about. Parents said you were telling him you'd slept with your boss." Geraldine reddened. "I didn't think he was such a talker." "It's true?" Emma got up to make them some lunch, Campbell's soup and pastrami sandwiches, of which Geraldine ate 2, very slowly, as she narrated her story. "I was working as a translator for the news station." "Oh, you know another language," said Emma. "A few," said Geraldine. "How did you get the opportunity to learn them?" "Well, I left the country for my uncle's sake. I didn't think he could afford another lawsuit after all those problems my mother caused him." "You had to leave the country? What did you do?" Nothing. That's the whole problem, I guess. My uncle had no real interest in me and was only taking care of me because my mother, grandma, and big sister had been shut up in separate prisons for 50-year sentences without parole. When I was 19, he came to me and said gravely, "I'm going to have to ask you to leave." "Why?" I said. I knew the streets and I didn't want to live on them. "You've been finished with high school for a year now." That's what he thought. More like 4 years. More like made a guest appearance once in a while, but never long enough to make top billing. "And you have not yet become a productive member of this household." Well, if I'd known he'd been offended by my sitting around all day, I would have gotten a job much sooner. I had no desire to offend anyone. Building things interested me, making things with my hands, creating spaces where people would live. So I got myself an apprentice position with a building contractor. Who would have thought working so hard would be so fun? Oh, those days in the sun with the guys, sweating, aching, but accomplishing. Finally, I had found something that would inspire me to have discipline. To live, really. Building was living. After all, it was all I did. I did nothing to offend anyone because I knew what it was to be offended. School offended me deeply, and I didn't want more of that going on than strictly necessary. The truck with the hand tools in it was pretty far down the street because it had been last to arrive, and I was carrying some hammers back to the house we were working on. I loved using hammers, after I learned to use them properly, that is. All around, there were unfinished houses and people under the sun working on them. And then there were these kids, messing around and messing up with the boards and tools lying around. Kids, I say, because I don't expect them to ever be full-fledged people. I was admittedly the only female there, and wearing clothes that would keep me cool. That's no provocation for the way that kid walked up close behind me and started whispering disgusting, hoarse things in my ear while his friends watched. I tried to elbow him away, but he got closer, and he put his hands around me and on my breast. I've never been so mad, and I hope I am never again. I'm frightened to know there is so much hatred in the world. I couldn't see. Everything was black. I stopped in my tracks. Despite everything I'd seen and done, that was the moment my innocence died, and I hadn't been warned about its loss. All the words in the world came to me then, and none of them were enough to say to this kid, so my throat was stopped. He didn't know I had the hammers, so with all my force and all the leverage I could find, I swung my arm back and hit him between the legs. He fell backward and blacked out. I hoped he was dead. I ran back to my uncle's house to find something familiar, and I told him what happened, and he arranged for me to leave the country. He thought it was best, considering the possible legal action he couldn't afford after already having gone through all that with my mother and grandma and sister. In my European travels, I really liked the Slavic countries, where I could smoke and sit in outdoor public places for long periods of time and think about the reasons for the war happening a few miles away. I always hated school because it asked for the discipline of an automobile part being assembled on a conveyor belt to stay put and be pulled along. But listening to people and trying to read the paper, outdoors and smoking without discipline, I could understand what people said to me pretty fast, and soon I could even shoot back an insult like a slum native. In those places, unemployment is a serious problem, but not for the unemployed. That way of life felt more like home than anything I've ever known. Expiring visas are the bane of a traveler's existence. I hid from them as long as I could, but then one day, a man who gave me a cigarette suggested to me that America must be better than this combat zone, and it had to be better than a Serbian prison, which was where I'd go if I kept up with the vagrancy and pickpocketing. "You may be an American," he said, and I lamented the fact. "But you don't have those rights here." He told me how he'd been trying to smuggle cocaine into Turkey and how they'd tortured his cellmate to death right in front of his eyes, how they'd kept him quiet with duct tape and even bound his hands and feet with it. He said the hair on his arms and legs grew back thicker, and he showed me the difference on his arm. Laura and Karen had finished their work, and bundled and muffled, they entered the half-consciousness Emma had developed listening to the story. "We'll be leaving now, ma'am. Do you want us to come in tomorrow?" said Karen. "Yes, please. Just like usual," said Emma. They started for the front door. "Have a nice evening." "Look at the time," said Geraldine. "What have I been doing?" "You've been telling me, and I want you to tell me more," said Emma through her weariness. She felt she would not sleep until she knew why Geraldine was there. She propped herself up on one arm, and when she found it necessary to move around, she started making dinner, and Geraldine moved easily back into her story. "I moved back in with my uncle and got a job as a cashier in a pet store. I won them over with all that street knowledge about pets I'd gained when I should have been in school. There was a Shakespeare festival in the next town, and after Tom Cruise left, Paul Newman came into the store. The girl I was working with was getting faint from all that star quality. But I hadn't been impressed by any of Newman's work, so I just stood there. "Don't you know who I am?" he asked me. He was apparently satisfied with my coworker's reaction, but not mine. "Yeah," I said just as arrogantly. "You're the salad dressing guy." He bought $25 worth of dog food. Why he travels with a dog that eats that much, I don't know, and doled it out in $1 bills, counting them as he pulled them out of a ratty old Velcro closure wallet. 1, 2, 3, 4. There were better things I could do with my time. I was glued to the television with the news about my adopted home countries. Channel 7 News, I noticed, had some pretty lousy English versions of the stories in the Slavic countries. So I went and inquired. They weren't buying the satellite translations with the rest of the packages because the news editor, Eric, wanted the translations just so. I translated a newspaper article and did a rapid-fire interpretation of an interview they were working on for that evening,
and they started me right away.
I thought it was because of Eric that the morning breathed, that the nightingale sang at my window. Eric watched over my every move to see that I was as faithful as possible to what the interviews had originally said, to the point even of literalism and glossing so that the English made sense only to people who knew Slavic languages. All for the sake of probity, accuracy, and truth. He was very distant. He had rigid moral standards and was hard to get along with if you didn't share his ideals. Eric seemed exotic to me, and I wanted to know all about him. He was so closed off, though. This fascination was like having another full-time job, as though all that translating weren't enough. I tried my best to look tidy and in control, like Eric did, but whenever he stood over me, I broke out in a sweat and spilled coffee on everything. Strangely enough, he seemed to like it like that. He laughed at my unemployed Slavic chain smoking as though it were the cutest thing he'd ever seen. He wanted to watch me spill more coffee, so he started taking me out. I looked up into his eyes, deep green as a forest and more mysterious. I felt he wanted to mold me, make me into what he wanted me to be. And I wanted it too. I looked into those green eyes, and I slept with him. And oh, what won't women do for love? That was the only time I'd done anything for love. And of all the things in my life, that brought me the most pleasure. Obliterating myself in someone so organized and purposeful. But it was bad for me. The wife found out and she made Eric dismiss me from my job. My uncle really wanted me to leave his house, I could tell. And here I am. Your forest reminds me of Eric's eyes, and living here, I see that it has just as much order and purpose. Even the most wild creatures have a plan. I'm very happy. Thank you. No, thank you, said Emma. You're quite a storyteller. You should write a book. I would give you Franklin study if you promised to put me in the acknowledgments. She yawned. Write a book so I can bore everyone like I've bored you? No way. Geraldine reached toward the plate of French fries Emma had just set in front of her. But then she recoiled in surprise. Thanks, but I can't eat that. Are you full? Well, I wouldn't say that. The thing is, French fries make me hiccup. Now you're really kidding. Emma had reached her limit of outlandish stories for the day. They really do. Are you going to make me prove it? Do all potatoes do that to you? Just French fries. Wow. Go ahead. Say it's weird. I don't mind. But the world was blurring. Emma rubbed her eyes. She laid her head on the table. I think I have to go to bed. Traveling will do that to you, Geraldine said. Sorry to impose on you for so long. The food was delicious. She got up again with an air of finality. Don't go anywhere, said Emma weakly. You must sleep in the house. But Geraldine had already slipped away into the cool evening air. Emma slid under the fluffy, clean covers of her bed, but the jet lag kicked in. There was no position that made her feel sleepy. When she turned to the left, there was Franklin. He reached for her hand as though he would go for a walk around the grounds.
Bones, in my life see never had I so many.
In his death, he seemed unable to speak normally, and Emma couldn't decipher it right away. What are you talking about?
Dead. About being.
This sounded like an index entry, and Emma recognized Franklin's organizational skills shining through even in his death. Bones are a problem when you're dead? Emma asked, humoring him like he'd always wanted her to.
Bones. So many.
And his skin disappeared, and all that was left were bones, and even they turned into ashes within a few minutes. Emma watched the entire process. When all that was left was some powder on the sheets, she got out of the bed to get a broom and a dustpan to sweep it up. The walk down the hallway was long in the dark, and she clattered the brooms and mops and vacuums around the closet and wished Laura would keep things in better order. And by the time she returned to the bed and kneeled on it to scoop them up, Even the ashes were gone. She screamed and jumped off the bed. She screamed again. Shivers ran courses through her body. "Franklin!" She couldn't stay in that room. She went into the hallway and along the walls, looking for doorways with her hands. When she reached the back door, Geraldine was there. Emma screamed again at the white apparition illuminated by the yellow porch light against the night of white flakes that kept falling and falling. "Why are you screaming? I heard you screaming and I nearly fell," said Geraldine. "Is there someone in the house?" "No, there's no one," said Emma. "No one at all." Emma didn't know how Geraldine had gotten inside, but all of a sudden, she was holding Emma firmly between her arms, containing all her fear, not letting it escape. The bulky white drape absorbed the tears Emma surrendered. But then she had to pull away. "Let me go. Take a shower," said Emma, her fear forgotten. Geraldine hung her head. "Is it that bad?" "A dead possum never smelled like that." Emma installed Geraldine in the front bathroom, complete with towels, soaps, hot water, toothpaste, and toothbrush. She reached in and took Geraldine's clothes while she was under the spray, and considered washing them, but they were so far gone already, it seemed a waste of effort. She shook all the items out of the wrap and laid them out on the dresser in her own room. She recognized the use of the knife and a few others, but most were esoteric. When Geraldine came out, wrapped in a towel, shining and looking thinner without that layer of grime, Emma was sitting on the floor in the entry hallway, going through her bags of souvenirs from Mexico. "Did you enjoy yourself?" said Emma. "Oh yes, thanks." Emma studied Geraldine's hair and saw that it was still very tangled and wild. "What happened to my clothes?" said Geraldine. Emma stood up. She was holding a small clay bird with 3 holes in different places over its body. "When I saw this, I thought of you," said Emma. "Of course, I couldn't be sure you would be here when I got back. But here you are." Geraldine grasped the bird and said, "Where are my clothes?" "I threw them in the incinerator. See, it's a whistle. When they demonstrated for me, it sounded like a real bird, but now I can't figure out which hole to blow into." Geraldine blew into the bird's foot, and a shrill sound came out. She rubbed her finger back and forth along the bird's spine, and it sounded just the way the boys had demonstrated, like a real Mexican bird. Then she said, "You burned my clothes? You knew all my stuff was in there." Emma listened with glee. "That's it! How do you do that?" "I took all the stuff out before I burned the clothes." Geraldine blew in the bird's foot again. "Then where's the stuff? I can't survive in the tree without that stuff." Emma took the bird from Geraldine and unsuccessfully blew on the bird's foot. "They're in here," she said then, and started toward her abandoned bedroom. "I hope you don't feel it's necessary to survive in the tree anymore. I want you to stay in the house, please." Geraldine looked over the things on the dresser before saying, "So what clothes am I supposed to wear?" Emma leaped to the closet that had been Franklin's and flung it open. "These!" she said triumphantly. But then she saw that there was only one suit. "I don't understand it. There used to be hundreds of suits in here. He wore suits every day. I was going to give them all to you." Geraldine reached for the hanger and then closed herself into the closet. Emma waited for her to come out and change the sheets on the bed. Geraldine stepped out of the closet and strode toward the full-length mirror. Suddenly, she bore a striking resemblance to Franklin. The pants were too long and the waist too loose, but the rest made her look lavishly, loosely powerful. "Now that suits you," said Emma. "I don't care for puns, and I'm only accepting this because you burned my other clothes. My grandmother used to wear those clothes." Emma fetched some safety pins out of the dresser drawer and handed them to Geraldine to pin herself up. "Are you really angry?" Geraldine pinned and considered. She sighed. "No, I guess they just made me look like a crazy woman anyway." With the pants pinned in 7 different places, she turned around and around again to get a good look at herself. Of course, this doesn't look all that sane. "Stay inside tonight. It's freezing outside," And tomorrow I'll take you into the city and replace your clothes with anything you want," offered Emma. Geraldine looked wistfully out the window. "It's not that cold. I can take it." "It's close to absolute zero out there," said Emma. She closed the door, and Geraldine stayed inside the bedroom. After pacing around the first of the 9 guest rooms for half an hour, Emma went into the library and took out Troilus and Cressida, which she read until her eyes burned so much she had to turn out the light. She sat in the dark until the morning saw her still awake before the help had arrived, and she had to go and make her own cup of tea. She was pacing the kitchen when Laura and Karen arrived. "Where's Piran?" asked Emma. "He thought he wouldn't come in today, with the garden covered in snow," Laura said. Karen said, "We hardly made it here ourselves. Such a storm I never saw." "Don't talk backwards," Emma said abruptly. She called Piran and demanded that he come in. Didn't he know she had to go shopping? What did he think this was? Laura was making a hearty breakfast and Emma was waiting patiently in the sunroom, which wasn't very sunny, when Karen brought the telephone. It was a lawyer. How had they known she was back? The flakes of snow kept falling and falling. Emma tried to follow their trajectories through the glass that extended and curved all the way from the middle of the ceiling to the floor. "I don't think this should be discussed over the phone," said Emma. "Why don't you come to talk about it in person?" The blizzard fell like the silence on the other end of the phone. "Yes, come whenever you can," said Emma. "I'll be looking forward to it." She hung up. "Oh, Franklin, why couldn't you have made your last will and testament at least as reasonable as you?" Comparable silence. Breakfast was ready, and Piran had arrived. Emma charged down the hallway and knocked on the door behind which she had placed Geraldine. There was no answer. She cracked open the door and saw that the light was still on. She opened it further and softly called Geraldine's name. She opened it all the way and saw that Geraldine had not used the bed. She was balanced precariously on top of the dresser, her legs and head hanging down, the stuff strewn on the floor. "Geraldine!" She whipped herself upright and looked seasick. Emma thought she might fall off the dresser as her blood transferred from her head to the rest of her body, so she went to catch her. I'm okay, Geraldine claimed. She slid off the dresser and pulled at the pants to smooth the wrinkles. "What's the rush?" "It's almost 10 o'clock, said Emma. "We should eat and get going before all the crowds get into the stores." "Oh, yeah. Okay. Here we go," said Geraldine, still looking disoriented. Emma helped her consume the hearty breakfast amid weak protest that she just wasn't hungry. After a cup of coffee, her eyes brightened a little and she said, "It's all a conspiracy to make me fat." Emma surveyed the anemic circles under Geraldine's eyes and the large folds of clothing covering her bony frame. It shouldn't have taken quite so many pins to hold those pants up. She patted Geraldine's shoulder, sharp even under the padding. "You figured it out. When you get out of here, we'll have to roll you down the street." Geraldine stopped sipping her second cup of coffee. This was to be a day of major purchases, and probably some lunch out, so Emma directed Piran to the local supermarket so she could use the ATM before gliding up the long highway to the city. At first, all Piran could see were white flakes before the wiper pushed them into mountain ranges on the windshield. And then, oddly, it seemed there were no parking spaces. He circled the lot once and came slowly around to the store entrance, and Emma and Geraldine pressed their faces against the side window as though it would help them see better. All along the storefront was a gathering of what Emma almost called demons because of the unreasonable fear they caused her. Some were bundled against the cold, some wore only black t-shirts, cigarette packs rolled into the sleeves. Emma lowered the screen and said to Piran, "What are they doing?" "Do you want me to go in with you?" asked Piran. Emma surveyed the row of humanity and screwed up her courage. "No, I can manage." She stepped out of the car and Piran went to park. Slowly, so as not to startle them, Emma approached the main entrance. A large man with blue veins blocked the automatic door and his woman stood at his side. "Are you trying to do something here?" the woman said, and Emma screamed. The man grabbed her from behind, pinning her arms to her sides. She struggled and kicked, and he squeezed her until she thought her ribs might break. A commotion broke out a few aisles down. A young man was running, knocking down people in carts. The woman's security officer said, "He has a weapon!" They left Emma to collapse on the floor. She collected herself and covered the 2 aisles as fast as she could. The security team had already apprehended the offender and were holding him face to the floor. The man wrested a water pistol from his hand. Standing over them, Emma said, "That's the dangerous weapon?" The woman looked at Emma disdainfully. "Yes, but things could have really gotten serious. We have tasers." Emma went back to the front of the store, used the ATM, and bought a pack of gum. The hoodlums were more pleasant about letting her leave than they had been about letting her in, and Piran swung around to pick her up. "Let's just get out of here," Emma said. It was dark when they returned, triumphant. The snow wasn't falling anymore. A warm breeze stirred up stray flakes before melting them. Emma had brought back a smile and some books from the travel section. Geraldine had gotten a wool coat, 2 dresses, 5 suits, underwear, socks, and 3 pairs of good shoes. She had also gotten a haircut, longer on the top than in the back, which brought Franklin to the front of Emma's mind. Geraldine looked at herself in every available mirror and exclaimed, "I look like Eric." They laid all their parcels in the front hallway, laughing with each other. When Piran had taken his leave in his own car, they heard a muffled slamming sound coming from the northern wing. Emma clutched Geraldine's sleeve and shuddered. "What was it?" Geraldine asked. "It's Franklin," Emma said irrationally. "What?" Geraldine said, and she started toward the north. Emma stayed in the entryway, shuddering. "Oh, my God," she heard Geraldine say from a long way down the hall. Sticking to the wall, Emma slid in the direction of the kitchen, where Laura and Karen had left the lights on as usual. "Emma, come here," shouted Geraldine. "No, you'd better not." She returned to the entryway and, finding it void of Emma, went to the kitchen. "Bad news," she reported. "The house is falling in." Emma was standing with a meat tenderizer in her left hand. "Oh, is that all?" she said. "Oh, but it's a lot. The entire Shakespeare library has been flattened." "Anything else?" "No, but there's probably more to come. It looks like your husband didn't do a very good job choosing this place." "He oversaw its reconstruction with his own eyes." "Okay, but he was no architect. This structure can't even withstand 5 feet of snow." "The radio said 6.5 had fallen." "Exactly. You can't stay here." "Where will I stay? Piran's gone and there's nothing around for miles." Geraldine considered. "If you quit wielding that tenderizer, I'll let you stay in my tree." Emma switched the tenderizer to her right hand. "I think I'll call a cab and go to a hotel. You're welcome to join me, of course." "You owe me nothing in that respect," said Geraldine. "I can't accept that kind of generosity." Emma picked up the phone and started pushing buttons with her finger, the tenderizer still in her fist. "But you accepted generosity in Slavia." "That was different. Now I have a perfectly good place to stay. One that you've generously donated to me already, by the way. And now I'm offering it to you." Geraldine folded her arms and looked at the linoleum floor. Emma hung up the telephone with a clatter. "The cabs aren't running. In Drain, they're snowed in and the Boonville taxi got into an accident." Geraldine just looked at Emma, but Emma felt herself sliced in half by the stare. The house groaned. Emma laid the tenderizer on the counter. "What should I bring?" Geraldine pushed the new haircut out of her eyes, and quickly and quietly, the house moaning around them, Geraldine named off things and Emma retrieved them from as close by as possible. When on the ever-decreasing pile of snow outside the back door, they had gathered several blankets, a pillow, and ropes, Geraldine shut the door and they were outside, standing in the warm breeze. Geraldine started to gather the things to take them to the tree, but Emma hesitated. She opened the door and put her head inside. She heard creaking sounds as the house battled the wind. "Franklin?" she called. The house was silent. "Franklin!" she sing-sang. "I love you!" She waited for an answer. When none came, she shut the door. Geraldine waited for Emma to pick up the rest of the blankets, and she started walking across the lawns, the slush seeping through her new shoes and around her toes. "Do you believe in ghosts?" Emma asked. "It's not a matter of believing," Geraldine replied. "They're so real, they're beyond belief." "Have you ever seen one?" "Lots of times. I should probably have told you this before, as soon as you got back, but things were happening so fast." They stopped and stood in the middle of the lawn because Emma was tired. "I saw a ghost walking around the grounds several times while you were gone. She looked a lot like you, but older, and I thought at first that you died in Europe. But here you are again." Emma rehoisted her blankets and started walking again. "What was she doing?" "She was just sort of looking around, like she'd never been here before, actually. And every time she saw me, she seemed frightened." "Huh?" said Emma. "I wasn't expecting you to say that. If anything, I thought you might have seen Franklin." "Franklin?" "My husband." "You never talk about him." "He died." They finally arrived at the tree, the biggest, the most comfortable. All the snow had melted or been blown off it already, and Geraldine deftly climbed up the solid trunk with the blankets and hung them up to dry. "We shouldn't have put them in the slush like that." Emma watched her from the ground. "He only died about 3 months ago. We still haven't settled all the problems in his will." "Whose will?" "Franklin's. I've only started seeing him since I got back from Mexico. He never wanted to travel. Do you suppose it takes a while for the souls to be processed before it's decided what's done with them?" Emma wondered. "Good Lord, no," Geraldine called down. "If there's a heaven, it's certainly not a bureaucracy. That goes against the whole idea." She jumped down, landing on her feet and bending her knees. "How did he die?" "Franklin? He was getting back into his car after using the automatic teller at about midnight. Someone was hiding underneath the car and they yanked him to the ground, took all the money he'd just withdrawn, cut off all his fingers, and slit his throat. Of course, they think his heart failed before all that. He couldn't go upstairs or anything, so I don't suppose he suffered as much as he could have." "Slow down," said Geraldine. "Did you have to see him like that? Mutilated?" "Franklin? No, his daughter, Lisa, identified him." "So they told you all that?" "Oh, I wanted to know. I begged them for details." "What did Lisa say?" "Oh, I've never met Lisa." "Never?" "No." "What about the assailant?" "I never met her either. They haven't found her yet. They think it was a former student who flunked his weed-out class. She sent him threatening letters." "Oh, he was a teacher. I didn't know that." "Yes, that's how I met him. It's funny, the different solutions to the same problem. I was also a very bad student of his, but I married him." Geraldine shook her head several times. "Now I really don't understand anything. You married him because you were a bad student?" "Actually," said Emma, her eyes glazing over, "I was a really good student. He was unable to appreciate that." "You lived with him how long?" 3 years. "Why?" "I'd rather not talk about it." Emma looked up into the tree and started to cry. "What's wrong now?" demanded Geraldine. "I'm afraid of heights." The warm wind blew Geraldine's new haircut into her eyes, and she whipped it back angrily. "This was a really stupid idea." "Yes," said Emma. "Maybe I'll just walk to town. You did it. It must be possible." No, I meant the haircut," said Geraldine. She reached out for Emma, which only set her crying more. "When it was long and I never combed it, it always stayed in place." She smiled. Emma couldn't smile. "It's all my fault. Now you're impractical and both of us will die out here." Geraldine released Emma with a shove and shouted,
Okay, look here. You have a bad attitude. I'm going to sleep in this tree, and you can do whatever you want. I cease to care.
The wind had been gaining force for some time, and not very suddenly, the blankets were blown out of the branches. They fell into the next tree and through the branches until they slipped down the trunk and were once again wet on the ground.
Oh, why didn't I renew my driver's license?
Emma sighed.
Oh, for crying out loud,
said Geraldine. She gathered up the blankets and, going up with the rope this time, she tied them in place.
I wouldn't let you drive in this weather. You surely would die.
She finished tying, and Emma just stood, sheltering from the wind among the trees. Geraldine came back down and grabbed hold of Emma's shoulders, marching her to the trunk.
Pretend it's Franklin, she said. Pretend he's trying to leave to go to the automatic teller.
Emma's eyes widened, and she looked at the trunk, unable to imagine. Geraldine took her arms and wrapped them around the trunk.
Okay, don't even pretend. Just hug it. I'll be behind you. I won't let you fall. Go up the damn tree.
Emma looked at her own feet next to Geraldine's in the slush and felt its icy chill crawl up her ankles. The tree branch had never seemed so far away, not even from the view from her bedroom, where she had seen that possum fall that day so long ago. It seemed impossible that it had happened before Geraldine had come to stay in its place. How could it have been that Emma had lived 3 years with a man named Franklin inside that house and not had Geraldine in the tree? How could she have lived 30 listless years on the earth, barely even noticing the trees all around her? And she was comfortable on a branch, and it wasn't the lowest branch, but the most sturdy, the best able to support her. She couldn't remember how she'd gotten there, only that it had been subconscious. She looked down and wasn't dizzy. She watched Geraldine come quickly up to rest in the next branch. The blanket was very unwarm as Emma leaned forward, letting the wind brush her hair, and looked over her estate. The house was a strange gray square bracket with a serious dent in the roof. She thought she could see stray Shakespeare books on the exposed floor, but much clearer under the moonlight were the scientifically straight lines of the vegetable gardens and orchards. She thought she could see a wooden cross emerging from the melting snow near the potato patch, the mark of the proper burial Geraldine had given Cordelia. She was distracted by the tidy way the plums had fallen to the ground, the squareness of the stables, and the shock of the clear wide lawns coming against the trees. She didn't imagine it would take much to repair the gray house. After all the renovations, it was still cheap. All that was required was a little effort, a little thought. While unconscious, she felt no fear. The day was dark, and most colors turned gray when she tried to look at them, but she knew exactly where she was, at an ocean cliff she had never seen while awake, with great rocks with moss growing in the night. The drop was at least 1,000 feet. Someone jumping off the cliff would meet more jagged rocks under the salty water. This idea interested Emma, but then she saw that strewn along the face of the cliff were at least 100 rotting corpses, their clothes dissolving in the stinking sea air. Some lay perfectly still, others writhed, uselessly fighting against life. Emma could tell with the sort of telepathy she possessed in dreams that the ones lying still were waiting for death to come to them. They should have been long dead, but for all their wishing, consciousness wouldn't leave them alone. Emma realized she was one of them. Her brown business suit was dirty and torn. Only a few white hairs clung to her scalp. She felt with her hands that her skull was clearly outlined through her shrunken gray skin. She made her way slowly around the surface of the cliff, dragging herself with her left arm. All of her other limbs had been torn or rotted away. She pulled herself to the edge of the cliff, where there was a body rocking slowly. The remains of his face wore a pained expression, and stray tears fell out of his eye sockets. He replied before she asked, "To die, you must lie perfectly still, but it's hard. I've been trying for years." "But Emma, why do you want to die?" asked a young woman in the earliest stages of putrefaction. "You have so much going for you." Emma wondered what she had that they didn't. Most of them still had their limbs, at least. She felt them about to explain, but then she fell from the cliff's edge. Trying to hold on, her last arm fell off. "4. The first thing Emma saw in the brilliant light was Geraldine falling out of the branch next to her. She landed on her feet, as always, and called up to Emma. "It's a beautiful day. What do you say we get to work?" "Work?" said Emma. She felt supremely cozy exactly where she was, bundled in the blankets in the tree branch and feeling patches of sunlight snuggle her through the shadows of the leaves. "You know," said Geraldine, "fixing your house." Emma looked out over the estate. It was shining in the summery light, and then the house, with its steel-gray paint and broken roof, sadly soggy. "Oh, what a mess," said Emma. She stirred and felt herself lose balance. "Oh, no!" "Just let go," called Geraldine. "Bend your knees when you land. Don't look down. I'll be here if you need catching." Emma fell bottom first into a pile of ferns. The effect was better than coffee. And the crash was just as harsh after they walked together across the wide lawns and looked inside to see how the house had fared. "Oh, Frankie knew how to pick 'em," said Geraldine. Every surface was covered with water, whereas the sun had evaporated the melting snow in the morning. The light hadn't reached the inside of the house, and a chill spiraled through the air as they surveyed the damage. Emma leafed carefully through the phone book as it soaked up the puddles on the kitchen counter. The contractor said he could be out there later in the day to assess the damage. "I guess it sounds like an expensive enough job to be worth his while," Emma said, with an unforced cynicism as she hung up the phone. "Should we be hanging around inside here? Will we be crushed like corpses in a grave?" She remembered that the previous night she dreamed strangely about mortality. Geraldine listened. "I don't think it's going to fall anymore. We should be okay. We could start cleaning up." Emma didn't feel much like cleaning. After she called Karen and Laura and told them not to come in, she and Geraldine went into the far recesses of the house, investigating, and Emma asked, "Does that tree give you weird dreams?" Geraldine smiled warmly. "I often dream I'm flying. I never did that until you let me use your tree. In fact, I used to dream about crashing a lot until I liberated myself from all that stuff in the world. I always forget to tell you how grateful I am, don't I?" "Well, I am." Emma gave no response. "Didn't you sleep well?" asked Geraldine. "Famously, but I had a weird dream." Emma wasn't seeing the house at all, but the images from the night before. Geraldine pointed out small problems, and Emma nodded, trying not to look like she wasn't paying attention. It was all so dark and full of punctures. Her mind couldn't reconcile the bracket-shaped house with reality. She felt her brain become shrunken and full of holes, with wisps of white hair. She excused herself from Geraldine, who had been setting up a pump to get the water out from under the house, and stumbled into the bedroom she had shared with Franklin. After switching on the light, which only made things look darker, more intolerably sandy, in the back of the empty closet, she found the slender box that held her wedding dress. In her memory, it glowed. That day so long ago she had felt like Madonna, a halo emanating not from her spirit or her skin, but from the dress. It wouldn't be touched by the strange gloom that had leaked into the house through the hole in the roof. She took the dress out of the box and began unfolding the white sheet she had wrapped around it to keep it from yellowing. The color was exactly as she remembered it, coming up high, covered with sequins and faux pearls. Emma felt the room brighten noticeably. The bulb hanging from the ceiling flickered weakly. The sleeves looked almost the same, too. Some of the lace was folded wrong, but that was to be expected. Emma laid it out the right way, and it stubbornly sprung back out of place. Well, stubborn but beautiful. She unfolded the rest of the sheet and took in the entire semi-cathedral train all at once. She nearly fainted. The bile rose in her throat. The light bulb expired, and Emma was left in the curtained twilight of the closet alone with a wrinkled dress. Geraldine set the water pump to work and came looking for Emma. She found her on the floor of a dark closet.
"Are you still sleepy?" she asked.
Emma kept her face turned away, but couldn't stifle the tears in her voice when she said,
"I didn't know satin could wrinkle. Did you?"
"Silly Emma. That is the main occupation of satin. Wrinkling. Was this your wedding dress? It's gorgeous."
"You can have it,"
said Emma. She wiped her face with her hands.
"There's no earthly reason for me to keep such a thing."
"Sure there is,"
said Geraldine. Water was dripping from the ceiling onto the back of the dress, so she started wrapping it up and putting it back in the box.
"Sure there is. Sure there is. Memories. What would we be without memories?"
When she had the box sealed, she went to the kitchen to make some sandwiches. Emma opened the box again and folded it back the right way. She put a wastebasket under the leak. They spent the day cleaning the refrigerator, which was mysteriously full of green, white, and blue cheese and black bananas, and eating the remains of past feasts. The pump ran all day and was still not finished when Geraldine decided to turn it off because it was undulating. Emma peeked into the Shakespeare library and saw blue sky everywhere. She picked up some of the books in the regular library, which had fallen to the floor, possibly due to the wind coming from the Shakespeare library. She took Troilus and Cressida and sat outside with it under the tree until the sun went down. The contractors never showed. Geraldine inspected Emma's book when she came back into the library.
"Ha! Chaucer! If only I knew more about Middle English. What a pleasure it would be to translate that stuff into modern English, or maybe Slavic. Surely I could do a better job than all of those other schmucks. Could you teach me?"
"I just like it because I can't understand it," Emma said. "I know nothing about Middle English. I think Franklin bought this book thinking he would compare it with Shakespeare's version. He never indulged in any other such frivolities."
"Oh," said Geraldine. "I was just thinking that now that I have all this time, not working for a slave driver and all, I could work on something really involved like that."
"You couldn't just do it while you were working and stuff?" Geraldine let air escape her mouth. She was speechless.
"Who's the one who hasn't been to school here?" she said finally. "You think translating is easy? You have no idea."
"You were bragging about doing those translations for Eric so fast and everything."
"Oh, and it wasn't easy. I had to apply all my theories of translation in the space of 5 seconds. Don't think that just because I was translating speech and not some important book that I didn't take it all seriously. Everything is literature, and I had to treat it with all the respect I could fit into that amount of time. Oh, the pressure of working for him. It gave me ulcers to think about it."
"And you still had time to fall in love with him?"
Emma laughed.
"Don't laugh," said Geraldine. "Love doesn't take time. Love doesn't need a special route. Love just is. Love didn't have a problem finding its way into my life. My life had a problem fitting love in, and that's the truth."
She set Troilus and Cressida on the table next to the reading lamp.
"Seems like it's about time for bed. Are you coming outside?"
Emma considered. In the chair, she saw Franklin, half reclined, his fingers twitching the way they had always done before he would invite Emma to bed.
"Yeah, I'll be out in a minute," said Emma.
All day she'd been breathing fresh air, and when she re-entered the old bedroom, its air seemed musty and unbreathable. She choked. She changed into a lightweight nightgown, white with a green lizard pattern, which she had only used when Franklin was away. It was frayed at the hem. She turned out the light and said, "Franklin, there were never two more separated people than you and me. Sleep well." Going out to the tree in the warm air, Emma asked Geraldine where she had learned of Chaucer if she hadn't gone to school.
"Oh, I found ways. I cherish my knowledge of all kinds of things you would probably find obscure. I guess there's still a lot I haven't told you, even with all those stories I forced you to hear."
Geraldine boosted Emma into the tree, and she climbed with a beginner's agility. I don't know how that could be, said Emma. I feel like I've known you all my life, Geraldine. Geraldine smiled across at Emma from her branch. I feel the same way about you. I know everything you're going to do before you do it, and the reasons why. Do you understand me like that? Emma nodded deeply in the dark. Yes. She felt almost as if Geraldine's brain had physically entered her cranial cavity. You know why I need to live in the tree? Oh, yes, said Emma. That was what she understood best of all. The branch cradled her more lovingly than her mother's arms. The pulsing of the sap was more sure than her own heartbeat. The leaves whispered something in her ear. Emma, what are you doing? Geraldine shouted. I'm sleeping here, Emma shouted back. Geraldine looked across and saw Emma next to her. Oh my God, that wasn't you down there. It's the ghost I was telling you about. Look! Emma looked, but the ghost was already gone. She looked just like you, said Geraldine. Just like you at 50 or 60 years of age, that is. I wish I'd seen her, said Emma. Just look in the mirror and you'll see her, said Geraldine. The resemblance is shocking. They fell out of the tree together and ran across the lawns to find a mirror in the dark house. She was even wearing a floating nightdress like you've got, said Geraldine. As Emma inspected herself, Geraldine pointed out the similar features. Her eyebrows pointed just like that, her nose curved just like that, her lips pursed just like that. Emma, are you sure that wasn't you down there? Did she also have sleep in her eyes like this? Emma asked. She lay down right there on the bathroom rug and slept the rest of the night there. It was easier in the morning to face the day when she was already level with the ground, but at the same time it seemed lessened, perhaps because she was unable to get an aerial view before starting. Emma called the contractor again and calmly explained the urgency of the situation, saying that she'd been sleeping in the tree, waiting for her house. All right now, ma'am. No need to get hysterical. We'll be there as soon as we can, he replied. Emma felt, from the sound of his voice, that he was the Milford named in the ad in the Yellow Pages. Geraldine joined Emma in the house soon after she had called Karen and Laura yet again to tell them not to bother coming. What shall we do today? Geraldine asked, hungrily eyeing the drip marks running down the walls and pieces of roof all over the floors. If you'd like to do some of this, don't let me stop you, said Emma, as she felt that sandy heaviness come over her again. But I think I'll read. She noticed the little clay bird whistle she had brought from Mexico for Geraldine lying unhappily on the floor and shoved it in the voluminous pocket of her nightdress. She sighed and took Troilus and Cressida into the sunroom. Geraldine followed her and said, You don't seem like you really want to fix this place up. Emma fell into a chair and massaged her own shoulders. Of course I do. I'm terribly anxious to see this estate restored to its former splendor and everything. I'm just tired. I slept on the floor. And in a tree, added Geraldine, as she slipped back out of the room. Emma couldn't understand Troilus and Cressida any more than she had the day before, and she found herself looking out the tall windows across the street at the mailbox. She got out of the chair as soon as she noticed something seemed to be bulging out of it. Its door was held closed with a rubber band. No one's checked the mail since I left for Europe, she exclaimed, and started out the front door. She thought better of it and went back into her bedroom to put on some shoes and throw on clothes that wouldn't get her arrested if seen. The clay bird fell out of the pocket and stayed on the cushiony carpet. She brought part of the stack of mail to the kitchen counter, where she was used to taking care of such things, and went out for the rest of it. It looked like mostly junk and polite letters from lawyers addressed to the estate of Franklin Andrews. But on the top of the second stack, Emma saw a personal letter addressed to Geraldine. Goodness! Was she so comfortable that she had already started giving this out as her permanent address? Geraldine, she called. You have a letter! Geraldine didn't come, and Emma found her in the farthest recess of the bracket, hammering some shelves on a wall in a guest bedroom. Why they had fallen, Emma couldn't guess. "Wow, you handle that hammer so professionally," she said.
"Thanks. I guess I haven't lost my touch after all."
She stepped back and admired the level shelves, touching them to be sure they would hold up before she put the brass figures back on them. "You have a letter," said Emma.
"A letter?"
exclaimed Geraldine. Her face went white.
"The only person who would know I'm here is Eric."
She took the letter and tore into the envelope as though it were suffocating her only child. It fell to the floor, and Geraldine unfolded the letter. Tears came to her eyes, and she held it close to her heart.
"He's written it in Slavic."
She glanced at it again.
4 different dialects of Slavic, all at once. Oh, I love him. Oh, here I go again.
"What does it say? What does it say?" cried Emma. Reading and smiling and translating through her tears, Geraldine said,
"He tells me he's glad to know I have a good place to stay. He thanks me for the biker party I sent his wife while he was out of town. He tells me his wife left him and he wants to see me again. Oh, God! The rest I won't paraphrase for you."
Emma smiled. "Well, that's great." She backed out and started for the kitchen to look at boring lawyer notices.
"Emma," Geraldine called, "I haven't invested all this time and emotion in you for nothing. Turn around."
Emma stopped, but didn't turn around.
"Look," Geraldine said, "I haven't decided anything. I may have loved Eric, but he never really seemed to think very much of me. And if I'm welcome, I want to help you rebuild your house. I haven't decided anything."
"Yes, you're welcome to fix my house,"
Emma said brokenly. An embarrassing sob escaped her lungs.
"Of course you are. More than welcome."
Geraldine held on to Emma, yet again keeping her fears from running away with her.
"Then certainly I will be more than happy to stay."
They pushed past a pile of wet papers in the doorway and invaded Franklin's study. Geraldine settled into the roll-top desk with Eric's letter, and after savoring it for 2 hours, she began a long reply.
"Emma, do you mind if I ask him to come see me here?" she asked at one point. "I think it will be the most beneficial to see him again if he's in my territory, where I can call the shots and the fouls, and even call time if necessary."
"That's a great idea," said Emma. She was sitting in the overstuffed velvet armchair next to the stack of mail on the floor, where it reached the height of her knees, sorting and reading. The junk she found entertaining, at least. The others gave her the familiar headache she always got when the lawyers barraged her in person. She looked up from the mess and found through her watering eyes that it was nearly midnight when the doorbell rang.
"Good day, ma'am," said the contractor.
Emma looked at her watch again and could only reply, "Good night."
"I said I'd come today, and I have," he said valiantly. "I knew your case was urgent."
"Well," said Emma. She looked at Geraldine. "Come on in and have your look, Milford." He stepped inside.
"My first name's Frank," he said.
Emma looked away to hide her surprise, and Geraldine said,
"That's a fine name for a man employed the way you are."
Glancing about, Frank Milford said,
"It doesn't look all that bad."
Geraldine looked at Emma, who seemed to have crawled far away into a hole, and replied,
"It looks much worse in the daylight. Come this way and you'll be able to see night sky where you should see ceiling."
After he had seen the Shakespeare library and the related damages, Milford nodded his head and shivered in the night breeze that shouldn't have been indoors.
"You're right. This is pretty urgent. The whole structure is faulty, and what we'll probably have to do is tear the whole thing down and start over. You might as well design yourself a better floor plan."
Then he looked into Geraldine's eyes and added gravely,
"The way we'll dismantle it is probably going to cost more than you expected." "Oh, the house belongs to her," she said, gesturing toward Emma. "I don't know what kind of budget she planned."
I really didn't think I'd have to spend much at all. It's a very cheap house," Emma said, coming out of her daydream. "When he fixed it up, my husband didn't spend much, even though he's got quite a sum he certainly didn't use for anything else." Milford pulled a wad of paper and a pencil from his vest pocket and made some notes and wrote some figures. He tore off the top sheet and handed it to Emma folded.
"That's the estimate," he said. "As you can imagine, this is my last call of the day. I'll send some people first thing tomorrow morning, since your case is so urgent."
He led himself out the front door, and in the dark, Emma said, "All right."
"You seem tired," Geraldine said.
Emma was already headed for the tree, and this time she was able to climb her branch as though she had always lived there, and fell asleep as if she were in her mother's womb. 5. Geraldine was reaching toward her and whispering,
"Emma, there she is. Look!"
Emma's eyes went directly and clearly toward what could have been her own reflection in the nightlight of the swimming pool, if they'd had one. She involuntarily fell out of the tree. The ghost ran inside the back door to hide, and Geraldine followed Emma's example, helped Emma back onto her feet, and they shot into the house, holding each other by the hand. The ghost had ducked under the stools at the bar. Emma, off balance, lunged toward her, but Geraldine held her back with a hand.
"Who are you, and what is your business here?"
Geraldine demanded.
"What are you doing with Emma's face?"
The spirit climbed out from behind the stools.
"Hey, I've had this face all my life.
And from the looks of it, I've had it longer than she has." Geraldine laughed.
"She's right about that, Emma. Do you remember stealing anyone's face at any time in the distant past?"
Emma felt her own face and studied the ghost. "There isn't that much of a resemblance, is there?" The spirit laid her hand on Emma's cheek, demonstrating their physical similarity as well as her material presence. "You aren't really a ghost, are you?" Emma suspected.
"Yes, partly. No, I'm Lisa, Franklin's daughter. I've been checking up on things. I've been waiting for my inheritance."
Emma was still suspicious. "How could you be Franklin's daughter? You look about 50 years old." She stopped herself. "I beg your pardon. I've just been asleep and don't have my etiquette about me yet."
"It's a compliment, dear. I'm 54 years old, if I'm keeping track right."
"I don't know why that bothers you," said Lisa. "Is there a light switch around here?"
"The bulb broke and we can't find any other ones," said Geraldine. "As you can see, the whole house is going through a tough time."
Lisa nodded patiently.
"I've been checking up."
She sat on a stool and faced them. "How about something to drink?" "I'm sorry, I'm such a bad hostess," said Emma. "I don't know much about bartending. If you can do it yourself, you're welcome to it. It's all well-aged, I'm sure."
"Have some nuts while you're at it," said Geraldine. "Also guaranteed well-aged."
She sat on the stool next to Lisa.
"So, you're the famous Lisa. Why don't you tell us about yourself? We love stories."
Emma stood on tiptoe, her arms spread wide. "No! You are not Franklin's daughter. You have no right to be here."
"Why do you say I'm not Franklin's daughter? Didn't I suffer through my childhood with him? Didn't he reject me in the end like the son of a bitch he is?" "Was. What proof do you need?"
"You're older than Franklin was," Emma said at an uncontrollably high pitch.
"How am I older than Franklin? He was 75, 76 when he died."
Lisa squished a nut between her teeth.
"These nuts are even older than he was."
She snickered, and Geraldine laughed. Emma, swaying over her planted feet, objected. "This is not funny. You're trying to tell me Franklin married me when he was 72 years old and that I look just like his daughter? That's sick." Geraldine studied Emma and felt her forehead.
"You may be sick, Emma. You feel hot."
I need some air, Emma said. Geraldine led her out the back door, and Lisa followed. You don't seem to be taking this very well, said Lisa. I'm sorry, but I'm not lying to you. How old did you think he was? He died the day after his 50th birthday, Emma insisted, wiping some moisture from her eye. How old are you, dear? Lisa asked. 30? At least this Emma knew beyond a doubt. Lisa scratched her head. So, you marry a guy 20 years older than you, and he turns out to be 45 years older than you. He's dead now anyway. Emma sat down on the cold pavement of the patio. He lied to me for 3 years. I know how you feel, said Lisa. He lied to me and my mother for a grand total of 700 years. She lit a cigarette. The amazing thing is that Esteve, my husband, he's Catalan, that's why the great name, doesn't lie to me as far as I can tell. Yes, that is the truly great achievement of mankind, that one man among the millions does not lie to his woman. Of course, maybe he gets all of his lying out at work. He writes Catalan nationalist pamphlets that I print and he distributes. I'm not saying he doesn't believe what he writes. Who knows? But he certainly does a lot of lying to get all that stuff overseas. And his good looks don't hurt. But I can always tell when he's lying to those suckers. And he's never looked like that when he talks to me. Of course, he doesn't get much chance to talk to me because I'm always talking to him. I'm sorry. I'm like Franklin. I talk too much. It was a defense against him, and now I can't stop doing it. He's not really my father, though. In fact, that's why my mother left. She got tired of his impotence. Emma looked to the sky, past the fading stars, and felt herself plunge into the cold universe. What she wished for were some fuzzy slippers to protect her feet. The sky was looking pink and gold, and the trees were full of bluebirds. Impotent, said Emma. That explains a lot. Geraldine began to move slowly back into the house, shading her face from the morning light. Oh, Geraldine, it's all right. I'm not embarrassed to have you here, said Emma. You're not embarrassed? Said Geraldine nervously. What about me? Here I'm telling you about all the carnal acts I've performed with Eric and others like him, and here you've never consummated your marriage. You jump to conclusions, said Emma. But they're the right ones. She just had time to regain her composure when a group of men came around to the back of the house. They wore big smiles and overalls in the morning chill. We're here to fix your house, ma'am, said one. We've been ringing the doorbell for 10 minutes. Should we get started right away? Emma hesitated, but Geraldine said, Sure. I think the biggest problem is the roof in the Shakespeare library. I'll show you. Lisa was puffing away, satisfied, her eyes dreaming in some spaceless reverie. I do want to make it clear that you have no inheritance coming to you, said Emma. Franklin disowned you long ago, it seems. If you are Lisa. But if Franklin was that old, how come his mother was still alive and looking so youthful at his funeral? That was probably his sister, Lisa said. Of course, I wasn't there, but she tended to help him out in his charades often enough. She was sympathetic in his money schemes, and when he was seducing his students, it seems. Seducing his students? Exclaimed Emma through her red face. How is he seducing any more of his students when he's... Fingers, said Lisa. She extinguished her cigarette on the pavement. Oh, the places they'll go. Emma remembered passing some odd nights with her new husband and felt nauseated. You don't have so much to say about that, she said. Nope. All the therapy in the world isn't going to get that out of me when you already know exactly what I'm talking about. I talked to his killer recently. They've arrested her. That probably happened while you were away. If they convicted her, she's looking at maybe 70 years. They won't set bail. They aren't believing her story. But she was just the last in a long line of victims before you came into his life, Emma.
She told me, and I knew her story better than my own hand. Except that she decided to do something about it. She cut off his fingers, said Emma, and slit his throat. She has a lot of remorse, but I'm not sorry at all that she did it. I'm just sorry he got to one less poor woman before she did him in, is all. Are you sorry she did it? Emma listened to the builders using loud tools somewhere behind her. She smashed Lisa's cigarette butt further into the concrete with her bare foot. She thought about the short years of her marriage, and she remembered Walt Disney World in Mexico. She turned around and looked at the gray squareness of the house she had lived in. She took a clean breath. I'm not sorry at all. Without looking to make sure Lisa followed, Emma went inside to the Shakespeare library. The builders were hammering scaffolds to stand on while fixing the tops of the walls. Through the roof, she could see some of them walking around, looking for usable pieces. I'm sorry, gentlemen, she said. I've decided I can't use your services. Please go home. Emma, what are you doing? Cried Geraldine. Don't you want your house to be usable? Not really, she replied. She asked Lisa for a matchbook or a lighter and went into Franklin's study. She dug through the drawers and files and tossed various papers into the pile of mail she had been going through, and then used the lighter to set it aflame. Geraldine gasped. What are you burning? Lisa asked. Franklin's will and all the business and correspondence pertaining to it. She watched as the flame started out slow and become progressively more voracious. Geraldine ducked through the doorway and snatched her unfinished letter off the roll-top desk. Please don't destroy my life along with yours, she pronounced. Emma waited just another heartbeat, and then she went to get the fire extinguisher out of the Shakespeare library. The workers were packing up their tools. As she dashed out of the room, one of them called after her. It's been nice working for you. I guess we'll send you the bill. She extinguished the fire, and the three women inspected the damaged carpet and the scattered ashes of Franklin's will. Excuse me, ladies, Emma said. I have to make some phone calls. This doesn't seem like the sort of woman Franklin would marry, Lisa observed. Of course, she looks just like me, so he's probably still trying to make some kind of cosmic amends. And when my mother ran off with my dad, Franklin swore he'd get her back. Her name was Amelia, but is Emma always like this? Geraldine sighed. I used to predict her every move and word. Today, she's just not herself. Emma was discussing flights to Mexico City when her housemates joined her in the kitchen, feeling hungry. As they made themselves some hot chili and pastrami sandwiches, Emma called Franklin's lawyer voluntarily for the first time. There's been a terrible accident. The will and all the other papers have been burned. Oh, well, how can I be sure you didn't tamper with them when you copied them? The whole thing's been lost. Well, don't you think the whole thing was sort of null and void anyway? I mean, he named non-existent people in it. I have it on the highest authority that he had no male heirs. That's right, isn't it, Lisa? Franklin had no children at all, and even fewer male heirs. Lisa nodded between slashes with the knife, which was unusually sharp for cutting lettuce. Emma continued. No, there is no one who could have benefited from the will of a crazy man. Oh, that long, huh? Well, I just remembered, in the hospital, as he was dying, he whispered in my ear that he didn't want his will to be taken seriously. It was sort of a joke will, he said. He told me he wanted me to do whatever I wanted with it. What? Oh, yes, I know exactly. I want to give all the liquid assets to his daughter Lisa, and I want to give the land to Geraldine. Who? Geraldine was practically Franklin's Siamese twin. He loved her. There was no way he was going to die and not give her something. What? Well, I can't imagine why not. She was all he ever talked about to me. What? Wall Street? Look, the reception is really bad. Why don't you come over here and we'll draw up the papers? Why don't you bring Lisa's lawyers? We'll have a grand day. She hung up the phone and looked at Geraldine stirring the chili. Do you have any lawyers? There were those guys who worked for Eric in the slander cases, she replied thoughtfully. But that's about it. Okay, then. I guess you'll be all right with Franklin's. Say, Lisa, how do I get in touch with that woman who killed Franklin? And saved us all, Lisa said quietly. What do you want to see her for? Are you really going to give me the money? Because Lord knows I could use it. Of course, you could probably use it too. What will you do? I'll go to Mexico and teach English. I don't want Franklin's money. But I thought I'd take that student of his with me. She could probably use a break. No, said Geraldine. She's not really giving away all her money and land. You're tied to this estate more strongly than I care to think. I have no use for it. I've been rotting like a corpse in the sea air ever since I first saw this place. Emma probed the chili with the serving spoon. But you, Geraldine, thrive here. I want you to have it. You and Eric, if you like. You can have the trees, the house. Sorry, I messed up your study, by the way. The stables, everything. You can set rabbit traps everywhere and sleep in the tree, and to hell with everyone else. Even Eric, maybe, said Geraldine. Are you taking me seriously? Emma embraced her, chili spoon still in hand. It dripped on the floor. My dear, I take you more seriously than I take myself. Lisa wrapped her sandwich in plastic. I hope you don't mind. I'll be going. I've certainly got what I've been waiting for. Thank you. I appreciate it. Of course, I don't even know how much it is. Neither do I, chuckled Emma. I guess you'll be finding out. I wish you luck in Mexico. I hope you find yourself a good man named Esteban or something. Stay away from Ricardo's. Lisa kissed Emma on the cheek, picked up her sandwich, waved, and went out the back door. I need another man like I need a piece of squirrel pie, murmured Emma. Yuck, said Geraldine. She wiped the dripped chili off the linoleum. She stood up and saw Emma trying to watch Lisa out the back windows. What did you think of her? Was she what you expected? She brings bad news and sketchy advice. But I wish I'd met her sooner, Emma sighed.
Hello, I'm author Jessica Knauss, and you've just listened to Tree House, my first major work of fiction. I was all of 21 years old when I wrote this novella as my thesis to graduate with honors from Wheaton College in Massachusetts. I hope you've enjoyed it. Please be sure to subscribe to this channel. I wouldn't want you to miss out on all the wonderful stories. Thank you.